Okay, it's 2:15 and time for me to reopen the, or even open a session of the examination into the Enfield local plan. For those who have not been here before, I'm Stephen Lee. I'm the Inspector appointed to the Secretary of State to examine the plan and report to the Council in due course. Can everybody hear me okay? We have a couple of new faces. Have you been here before at all? No? Okay, thank you. Anyway, first of all, thank you for your patience in starting slightly late. Of course, I was slightly late, I say slightly, more than slightly, but a slightly late end to this morning's session. We'll try and catch up as much as possible, and I understand your representatives from site promoters looking at specific sites. So when we get onto the sites, I'll deal with them, yours first, and then obviously if you want to depart, you can. So I'll do I think it's 2.2 and 2.4, so I'll start with 2.2 and then move on to 2.4. Is that correct?
I think it's 2.4 and 2.8.
Oh, 2.8. Okay, beg pardon. My mistake. Okay, well, either way, I'll do that. What I will do, because you've not been here before, I'll just run through a couple of housekeeping measures, and so the council will have to do its spiel, I think. So obviously, if mobile phones, laptops, and other devices could be kept on silent mode. Say for those who have not been here before, we'll ask the council to reiterate their housekeeping measures and fire alarms. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, sir. So my name's Edward Jones. I'm Spatial Planning Manager here at Enfield Council. I'd like to take a few moments to outline some key housekeeping arrangements to ensure that everyone can participate effectively and comfortably throughout the examination process. We're not expecting a fire alarm test today. However, in the unlikely event of an emergency, the fire alarms will sound. Please exit the building promptly to the nearest marked exit to the back of the room. Assembly points are located outside the Civic Centre, and council staff will be on hand to guide you. Toilets are located on the ground floor, accessible via the reception area. If you require accessible facilities or additional assistance, please speak to a member of staff or our security team, and they will be happy to help. Also to flag that these sessions are being recorded as part of the official examination record. If you don't wish to be recorded, please inform the programme officer, Mrs. Feeney. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Just for the purpose of today, I went through all my long opening comments on day one and everything set out in my guidance note about how this examination is proceeding. Just a reminder that the purpose of the examination is to help me decide if the plan submitted in August 2024 is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. I'll be leading this in the form of a structured discussion. And so this afternoon we're talking about policy PL2 and associated allocations. I will start each agenda item with some questions to the council, and when I've heard the response, I'll invite contribution from others. So for those who've not been here before, I tend to try and get most of my questions out of the way up front, so it does require a little bit of patience while I deal with things. And if you've not got any comments on policy PL2, then there might be a little bit of a wait before we get on the allocation, but I want to go through that first because it's logical. When you do wish to speak, please turn your nameplate on this end. I'll bring you in at the appropriate time. And when you do speak, if you could focus your comments on my questions or specific points made by others. And I would also ask each contribution to be as concise and focused as possible. Once I've got to the end of an agenda item, I will ask the council either to sum up their position or at least if they have anything further to add, they will have the final say before I move on. But please don't leave the room at the end of the day before you've said what you wish to say, because there will be no opportunities to provide me with additional information after the hearing session is adjourned, unless I specifically ask for it. As with other sessions, if I identify that main modifications are required or that further work needs to be carried out by the council and or others, I will usually make that clear, and the council is keeping a note of all such matters. But there will obviously be things which I need to take away with me and give further thought to, and I'll advise the council about the outcomes of those issues in a later note or notes. I'll try and adjourn at about 3:30, or maybe between 3:30 and 4:45, and then try and finish no later than 5:30. We'll do what we can. So far, I've not been failing to do that on a regular basis. So, any comments about procedure before I move on? Okay, thank you. we'll just go start on these faces. We'll just do quick introductions, starting with the council. Thank you, Mr. Reid.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Matthew Reid, King's Counsel, representing the council today.
Thank you, sir. I'm Edward Jones, Spatial Planning Manager.
Richard Pestel, Partner of Planning at Rapley's on behalf of the Council.
I'm Katrina Fraser, Planning Director at Turley.
Christopher Sheila, Planning Director at Turley, here for Royal London, and I'm accompanied by Tom Hatch, Director at Quad, and Jamie Powell, Senior Development Manager at Need Development, Development Managers for Royal London.
I am Matt Byrne from Better Homes Enfield.
Okay, thank you. Just a final reminder, although Mr. Byrne will be sick of hearing this about, obviously, the purpose of today's session is to further the representations you've made at Regulation 19 stage, and so if you could obviously keep any comments related to those, I'm sure you will. It's not an opportunity to provide new points or new evidence. Unless there are any matters arising from this morning's session that I need to be aware of, I'm going to jump straight into policy PL2. Anything, Mr. Reid? No, I'm assuming not?
No, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, there's a couple, obviously, there's a few things, if you weren't here this morning, we talked about in terms of PL1, which also relate to PL2, so I'm going to very quickly skim over those. There's the point about the, I think we've accepted that the figures, in this case 3.3, for example, are in need of some work for them to be effective. Council are aware of this and have put forward some mods already, and there was a discussion, and one of the mods relates to a sort of table which sets out, which would sit alongside the map showing what the symbols mean. I've got to go away and think about that, but we did talk about some of these principles, so I don't intend to go over that again, but obviously I'll let people make a comment about the figure if they wish to. The other thing is reference to my question, a standard question, if you like, about whether the policy was expected to be met by all development. And I think, again, the council acknowledged that is not the case, and some suggested wording we put forward to make that clear, which I agree is needed. The actual final wording will be something to be agreed in due course, but I think that's something that will be in action for every one of these policies, just to be absolutely clear. And then the final there's a final question where I asked about the vision and so on, and one thing I will just say is that again, it's a point of principle with all of the allocations that you don't have any requirements in them. I'm not, again, you've answered the question in relation to I'm not going to ask that every time, even though it's, so again, that'll be something to reflect on for me and feedback on, but it may be that I feedback on these policies if need be, that without having the big debate. So actually, before I do get into the wording of the policy, are there any points anyone wishes to make about the figure 3.2 or the vision? Sorry, it is figure 3.3. Figure 3 point the vision. No, everybody content? Okay. All right, and so moving into the policy then. Criterion 1, I asked a question about this, refers to a comprehensive approach to master planning. However, there's obviously no reference to a master plan in any of the text, so it wasn't entirely clear what the subheading was relating to, as there is no master plan. If you look at Criterion 1 as a whole, there's a few references, things like in Criterion 1B to coherently planned approach, and then and the like. And if I just go on to some of the other criteria, Criterion 2 talks about three, I should say. Criterion 3 talks about a comprehensive placemaking approach and so on. So I just want to be clear what it is you're actually expecting in terms of coordination and coherence. I mean, are you talking about a coordinated and comprehensive approach in the same way as, say, development in PL10 and PL11? How are you going to deliver this supposed coordinated approach?
I think Dr. Jones can deal with that, but as a generality, it wouldn't have the same approach as one is looking at in terms of PL10 and PL11, and simply because of the makeup of the developments that comprise the PL2 placemaking area.
And just further to that, so our approach to master planning for larger sites is set out in policy SS2. So it relates to residential schemes over 50 or more homes. So although we don't currently, or we don't have plans for an area-wide master plan, the expectation would be that applicants preparing development proposals would submit site-specific master plans, and as part of that, they would be required to consider the wider context and how their development would knit into that. And of course, the kind of placemaking vision and the strategic policies for Southbury would help guide that process.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we haven't, I think SS2, I deferred from stage 1. It'll probably be deferred to stage 3, and I'll pick it up under something else. I mean, 50, I will just say now, 50 homes and 500 square metres for a master plan is exceedingly low. I mean, 50 dwellings isn't even phased, no phased approach to 50 dwellings. Why you would need a master plan for 50 dwellings is surprising, I'll say now. And 500 square metres equally, extremely low. I mean, master plan versus just plans. I mean, you know, I don't know what so there's a tendency now for councils to be obsessed with master plans when actually what they really mean is submit plans with your planning application, because if you need something more than that for a 50 dwelling scheme, then something's horribly wrong. And even if you do have that threshold, individual master plans for individual sites coming forward is not necessarily going to lead you to a coordinating comprehensive approach. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea to want that. What I'm saying is how are you going to achieve that, and is it justified in a situation where you're talking about piecemeal development across the area to expect developers to somehow be constrained by this comprehensive approach, or even how could they possibly demonstrate a comprehensive or coordinated approach when they're not in control of other parts of the site or not in agreement with other parts of the site? So these words are nice words, but are they actually effective or justified words?
I think so. I think the approach towards its being coherently planned is coherently planned in relation to the sites that are being considered, as opposed to between themselves.
Right. Okay. So if you've got the idea, if you've got a very large scheme in one of these sites, then it's about a sensible approach to developing that scheme rather than how it relates to anything else in the area.
It must be right. Yes.
Well, it must be, but it's not quite what it says, but okay. Okay, move on from that. Criterion 2, I didn't ask a specific question about this, but I just want to pick up on one point in there that it talks about a new local centre, I think. Yes, should provide an appropriate mix of uses with potential for creating a new local centre. Who's providing that new local centre, and who is it? What's it for?
Given the scale of development likely to come forward in Southbury, it's considered that there'll be a range of non-residential uses coming forward as part of that. And so I think the reference in part 2, it's intended to flag that the kind of growing quantum of non-residential uses could form part of a future local centre in any future local plan review.
Run that by me again.
So this policy's, this part of the policy is intended to, I guess, flag that given the scale of development coming forward at Southbury, there would be some non-residential uses coming forward as part of that. That could form, I guess, sensibly kind of consistent runs of non-residential frontages, which could start forming local parades. And it might be the case that over time that starts to develop the characteristics of a local centre. Formal designation of that local centre would, of course, be something that has to happen through a subsequent plan review. But this is just flagging that, given the quantum of development coming forward, that it may, over a number of years, develop into a local centre.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave that with me then. I think I'll consider that. I'm not... As is often the case, there's a distinction between what you've just told me and what I think that policy says, because I could read that policy to imply that somebody is going to have to provide a new local centre, which is not the case. What you're suggesting is that by some, I won't call it happy accident, but some result of these developments coming forward in their own time, at their own, with their own scheme, that a local centre may end up being a local centre by default, and that you, I guess, are talking about. So it's more from an urban design perspective, really. You're talking about, not from a must be delivering a local centre to meet the needs of new residents. It's if you are looking at, it's more about when considering layout and form, non-residential uses should or could be laid out in such a way or located in such a way that together a new local centre would be created. So that's, I think, what you're saying. But that's different, isn't it, to should provide an appropriate mix of uses with potential for creating a new local centre.
I think the intention of the policy is to guide those non-residential uses in a manner which can create a local centre in the future. There would be quite a quantum of those uses coming forward given the amount of residential development happening. So the intention for this is to ensure that that could happen in a kind of planned and coordinated way.
Interesting to see what the SA policies say about this. Okay, we'll leave that there for now. And then I've just mentioned 3 ends by saying the siting and location of these being the social infrastructure uses should be informed by a comprehensive placemaking approach. So again, that's not, I'm taking it as not somebody's got to come up with a comprehensive master plan for the whole area, but presumably when you are considering your applications for all these things and where some of the social infrastructure is going to go, you're expecting, I'm not quite sure what you're expecting, but what are you expecting?
In terms of social infrastructure, I guess it should be kind of located on, good design principles, so it should be located on main routes, it should be located at ground floor level with the potential to provide activity to the public realm, so, and be accessible to the users of the facilities. So it's those kinds of considerations that would weigh in the minds of development management planners.
Yes, quite. And isn't it interesting? I've said this before, the way you've just explained it is so much more coherent and effective than what the policy says. Because the policy is, if you like, defaults into this kind of, dare I say, pseudo-planning marketing speak, which doesn't really mean a great deal when you're talking about from a DM perspective and what in words mean something specific. What you've just said about locating social infrastructure on routes and blah, 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 that actually makes a lot of sense. And would be more, I would suggest, is an effective way of setting out what you want to achieve. On this more amorphous siting and location, these should be informed by a comprehensive placemaking approach. Well, but it's not going to be a comprehensive placemaking approach because you've got several allocations coming forward at different times with different people doing different things. So, okay, thank you. I'll again decide whether that needs some change or not.
So can I just come back to the question of the local centre, which I think ties into that point, because it's obviously important to bear in mind the overall vision that is identified for Southbury within the plan 44 and 45. And one can see under the figure 3.3 where the development to create active frontage that Dr. Jones referred to is being identified. And so there's an aim, a part of the vision is to ultimately create something that has its own centering of the area. So as opposed to there being simply happy coincidence that it will bring forward something that will amount to a local centre, there's at least, when one combines the vision with the figure 3.3, one can see the overarching delineation of that criterion 2 requirement.
Then I think, yeah, fair point. I think then either some reference back to 3.2, albeit it's illustrative, or a reflection, a clearer reflection of Dr. Jones's words, if you like, or what 3.2 actually sets out, would actually be helpful, because I don't think 2 or 3 necessarily reflect in words what is in in the diagram, or perhaps what is intended. And there's a sort of perhaps more effective getting to the point way of setting these out, which would be effective. And I have to be careful about saying more effective, because that's not a soundness issue. I'm sure you know what I mean. If it's effective in the first place, then it's effective, but I would suggest it isn't at the moment. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Nothing on criterion 4. I'm a bit... Again, you could argue criterion 4 it falls into the same issue about this sort of comprehensive approach, because how does each individual allocation or developer reduce severance? But that may be obvious on the ground, and what you're expecting. I'm not going to jump up and down on that one too much.
It does raise a general point about the strategy within the plan, which is to identify areas that should be focused upon in order to deliver framework scale change. And of course the countervailing problem of having a number of different allocations in order to achieve that, something very different from Cruise Hill and Chase Park. But it does mean that the council's had to go carefully in terms of, on the one hand, identifying sites, and on the other, being able to achieve the aims that it wants to. And the best way to do it is through the various principles that are contained within the PL policies.
I mean, if you go back, so it's a fair point, if you go back onto criterion 1, notwithstanding my abhorrence for the words demonstrate how, but you must demonstrate how individual developments will. And I suppose there's a similar point there under 4, isn't it? It's about how individual allocations will contribute to reducing severance, rather than must reduce severance. I think
It's similar to the sort of standard policy that one sees in plans, where it's made clear that an allocation shouldn't undermine the comprehensive delivery of a particular location.
Yeah, but that's the other way of
Put
looking
in
at
a
it.
positive way.
Wouldn't prejudice.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I have nothing on criterion 5 to 9. Others may. I asked a question about criterion 10. This was about SUDS. I think this was more about taking it that SUDS isn't necessarily needed or appropriate everywhere. I said, well, does the policy, because the policy says it must incorporate SUDS. I said, is that suitable and necessary? I think your response is basically yes, it is suitable and necessary. So you're content with it. But I think I think you do recognise there might be situations where it won't be necessary or pragmatic. So I wonder if it's the simplest thing in the world is just to include a cross-reference to, I think it's policy SE9, it's here, which you may have suggested anyway, maybe. But yes, I think it just cross-references that. So action that. One thing that I've noticed, or well, not noticed, one thing I wonder if is missing from PL2, yeah, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, is there's anything specific about transport improvements? Don't think, unless I've missed something. Beg your pardon if I have. And I was just thinking here about, obviously, reference, the A10 has been referred to in other places, I think, as being the potential for issues along the A10. Not just from objectors, but also I think it's possibly flagged up in transport modelling and something. It goes to that. I think the A10 is an area where there are issues. And except obviously again, I keep saying there are standard policies for this. There's no assumption that development wouldn't have to provide any mitigation and so on. But I just wonder whether, given some of the policies might refer to this sort of issue, is whether it is something that ought to be addressed? I mean, I say SUDS, you could argue SUDS, you don't need to mention SUDS because that's a generic policy, it's covered everywhere. By the same token, transport mitigation is, but you know, you're talking about potentially significant amount of development in the area. Other policies do refer to such things, so I don't know if it's something that should be included.
So I was just checking to see if TfL have said anything about it. Obviously, we're guided somewhat by TfL given the status of that road. I haven't found anything as yet, and indeed, no modification is proposed in respect of it. So it may be said that it's capable of being dealt with just under the generic development management policies.
Some thought then. I mean, yeah, I suppose when you do start getting into that, so you've got SUDS, which is a sort of borough-wide policy, and you've got other policies, which is a borough-wide policy. Then you say, well, what about transport? And then you get into what about BNG, and then you get into by then you've repeated the entire plan. So there is a point at which it's not productive. And I suppose the other way around is actually to take out the generic stuff if it's causing problems. But I'll leave that there. Any comments? Sorry, yeah, that's me on PL. Any particular comments on PL2 that anyone wishes to raise? Wording? No? That was simple. Good. Right.
Just for completeness, the A10 is referred to by TfL, at least in their Reg 18 comments, where they were happy with the provisions in Criterion 5 and welcomed those specifically with regard to the A10. So didn't say anything beyond that, from what I can see.
Yeah, so it's often referred to, there's a lot of references to active travel or public transport along these routes without necessarily talking about, if I might call them more traditional mitigation measures of junction improvements and so on, which may not be what, obviously, they want to avoid such things. Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, right, we'll move on then to, we'll start with SA2.4 then, if that's all right with everyone. Southbury Leisure Park. Sorry for moving around. Yeah. So here we have a mixed-use allocation for mixed-use redevelopment with compatible commercial and residential uses, public realm and environmental improvements, including improved walking and cycling routes. Again, for those who've not been here before, I've sort of I've suggested a generic action whereby, because land use requirements are policy, that the land use requirements that are set out in those tables ought to be at least written out in the land use requirement, because they are policy. So, as you would normally say, so whether it says a minimum of, or words to that effect, then that's just so it's clear what is actually expected. I understand. Sorry, with the land use requirements, it talks about compatible commercial uses, and then in the bottom row it talks about re-provision of non-residential use. So again, some clarity on what's expected in terms of non-residential. Is this a like-for-like replacement of whatever is there at the moment, or is it something different? Just for my understanding of what's proposed.
It's intended that there'd be a re-provision, some degree of re-provision of commercial uses on the ground floor of the development.
And is there a particular end to that? So is it as in the same amount of floor space, or the same function. If you're judging, again, I'm thinking, if you're judging an application, I mean, I know there's an application, I think, I might be looking the wrong way. If you're judging an application and it provides, you know, as I said this about a similar scheme this morning where it just says re-provide, well, what if it comes back with 5% of the floor space that's already there? It might meet your requirements of your land use requirements, but it might not be what you actually want to achieve. So is it, now you might not necessarily put a number on it, but it could be re-provide to ensure that whatever function is in place, like if it was retail, to maintain the vitality and viability of the retail park. In this case, is it to provide a certain leisure function? I don't know, you tell me. But
Yeah, so the intention is largely kind of placemaking benefits. So commercial activity, so there's commercial uses on site at present. There is potential for some of those uses to be re-provided at ground floor level to kind of, I guess, maintain that kind of commercial offer and provide activity to the street. But we wouldn't be looking for like replacement.
okay. Sorry, I should say I'm going to try and whip through my questions quite quickly. If you want, obviously, I'm not going to keep opening because we'll end up going in circles. So when I get to the end, I'll open it up then. But having said, something I will, maybe someone wants to comment on this, but I think something more, I don't think it's very clear or unambiguous at the moment about what is expected in terms of non-residential. Capacity, generally capacity, I've seen representations from a site promoter suggesting that the number here is too low and that the residential number is too low. Given the phrase in your table, which says approximate estimated housing capacity, and we've talked about this, whether or not the land use grants would say minimum of or approximate or something to that effect. What your views are on, obviously the scheme came forward that was for more than 605. How would the council look at that in principle?
So that would be analysed in terms of the impacts on things like daylight and sunlight, what standard of accommodation was being provided, are there dual aspects, flats being maximised, is there sufficient space at ground floor level to allow for kind of non-residential uses rather than having a kind of congested ground floor to serve an overdevelopment of flats above. So yeah, these are the kinds of amenity and placemaking considerations that would weigh in decision making.
So just in terms of the wording of the policy, it is, as you say, approximate estimated housing capacity, and it will, when an application comes in respect to this site, if it is for a higher number, it will be assessed against the relevant policies, bearing in mind what this wording says.
So there's no, basically the lot is that it's not meant to be a limit, is my understanding. It's not meant to be a limit. Okay. Having said that, obviously between approximate or minimum 605, what is approximate, you know, give or take X, you know, the site promoter has put forward a scheme, I think, or put forward a suggestion it could be more like 1,000, I think, so 400 is getting, I think 400 would be outside the scope of approximate. So has the council given any views or come to any view about what the site promoter suggested about capacity in light of the representations and so on, and whether they're content that your plan is still justified and sound?
So yes, and Mr Kennedy and Dr Jones will no doubt deal with this, but there has been certainly an assessment as to whether or not it's appropriate to do what is being suggested by the objectors, which is to replace the number that's within the approximate capacity with a higher number. So it does bear noting that the council has clear views on that.
Thank you, sir. I'll just cover the question on the capacity. So just to talk you through how we reached this number to start with, it's documented in the HELA. So for this site, in line with the methodology of site selection, we applied a bespoke feasibility study to this. So this was a simple capacity study commissioned in-house, and that looked at a scheme that would essentially meet the kind of policy requirements that Dr. Jones had outlined, and would be in line with things like our tall buildings policy, emergent tall buildings policy, and also make full use of the entirety of the site, so everything that's proposed inside that site allocation boundary. And from that, there was the capacity of 605 proposed. Following that, and obviously the representations from the developer and their agents, we have conducted a benchmarking exercise internally just to understand the kind of densities we're providing here and similar schemes. So we've looked at schemes across Enfield that have been consented and are under construction, such as at Meridian Water, and the kind of quality of proposal, given that they've been tested, gone through the planning process, and been found acceptable, as well as being of good quality. And we see that it is of a similar density, so we feel like that validates our work there. We've also benchmarked it against, it's just for an example here, sorry. So looking at 605 homes on this site, over the area of the site, that gives us 203 dwellings per hectare. If we compare that to other schemes in the borough, such as Joyce and Snell's, a much more complicated estate regeneration project, which is coming in about 200 dwellings per hectare with tall buildings, with other things. I think we're seeing there's a kind of similarity there. We've also compared it to things like Elephant and Castle, which as part of the pre-app, the developer actually took us around as a good example that we should be referring to. And that is coming out higher at 240 dwellings per hectare, but again, zone 1 location, incredibly high PTEL, essentially a kind of major centre of the borough, whereas this is more of a peripheral, you know, we're Enfield, we're out to a part of London. This isn't exactly Elephant and Castle, so I think that for us has validated our approach. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear what Mr. Reid was saying there.
Mr. Kennedy, that you'd asked him about the other the developments being proposed by the objectors here.
Sorry about that, I'll start again. So the proposal in front of us, which I think has been submitted as part of the reps, doesn't utilise the entirety of the site. So there's a surface car park which is not used for development, yet there's more, there are more homes being pushed onto the site, which has increased the kind of density overall in terms of the amount of height on the site, the quality of accommodation, through the pre-app discussions, just as not as a be-all and end-all of the ultimate marker of quality, but as a quick rule of thumb, the kind of level of dual aspect there, in line with the London Plan's definition, is a lot lower than what we're achieving on other schemes that we've compared our evidence to. So just to give you an example, on our scheme at Meridian, which is being built out, tall buildings, high density, that's looking at about 74% dual aspect, whereas the developer's scheme here is, apologies, just I had the note up here and it's disappeared, is looking at about 87% single aspect as the kind of GLA definition is, as well as that kind of high proportion of inactive frontage on the ground plane and impact on the overshadowing the school, etc. And I think, as you mentioned, it is an approximate capacity. So we're not saying we wouldn't entertain more than that, and it could be tested and challenged, which is what we'd encourage. Just that the current proposal doesn't. We don't think it stacks up with our approach and our benchmarking.
Thank you. The upshot being that what you've seen doesn't lead you to conclude that your approach is unjustified. Yep. So, okay. Fine. Thank you. The other point before we get into the criteria, obviously, is the issue of delivery. Again, this is not new. I've been mentioning this bit all morning about when you are looking at when this might come forward. And the time period is currently set as 5 to 10 years, which is obviously in the next 5 years. whether the council's still sticking to that. And while thinking about that, you'll be aware that the site promoter has been quite critical of the viability and delivery of the proposal as it stands. So I don't know if you have any views on that.
Well, just on the viability issues, so there are a number of points taken about the lack of viability and some detailed issues, but at least as I understand the position, we haven't been provided with any of that viability information as part of the representations. You know that we've undertaken our own assessment, been clear about the approach that we've adopted, and reached our assessment in the whole plan viability update appraisal. So there's not enough evidence before you to reach the conclusion that the approach adopted by the council here is an unsound one. Again, it goes out saying, if a point is being taken about viability in the future, with regard to amounts as opposed to the delivery, then that, of course, can come forward through a planning application if it's justified. We'll wait to see what's said about the timescales for delivery of any particular scheme when we hear from the objector.
I'll leave that for now then. I'll very quickly try and whip through the criteria where I've got issues or not. Just bear with me, I need to find... modifications. So, just on 2. Oh, and again, sorry for those who've not been here, we've had lots of discussions about these developer infrastructure requirements. Various things to pick up on are that there's got to be somewhere potentially some reflection on the fact that not all of them are needed for every, like must versus should, and sometimes clearly it'll be dependent on the scheme. So somewhere the plan might need to reflect on that. Similarly, there are some wordings that have been put forward often by TfL or the Council of Exception TfL, which might need some tweaks, which I don't intend to go in all the time. So if I do look past these things, obviously it doesn't mean you say you can't raise them. Just on number 2, though, for infrastructure requirements, you've got must explore the potential to remove the existing protection footbridge and introduce a new replacement pedestrian crossing. So again, similar point I was making this morning. Either you need a new bridge or you don't. What potential has been explored, and why is it only exploring it?
So it's an item that's been identified as important in the infrastructure delivery plan, although at present there aren't any live proposals to implement that aspiration. So yeah, the intention behind this requirement is that if that very large site is coming forward, then there is the potential to remove that footbridge, which presents quite a cumbersome way of crossing a key route, and introduce a more pedestrian-friendly crossing at grade level. Yeah, there's the ability for that development to result in that quite significant improvement to connectivity and permeability of the area.
Okay, as written though, if that didn't come forward, and an applicant justified why, that wouldn't be determinative, because it should explore rather than should do.
Yeah, so if discussions between the applicant and the council resulted in the kind of verdict that a bridge was not feasible, then that would be a kind of an outcome that would justify not delivering that particular piece of infrastructure.
Okay. One to think about. Should contribute to improvements at Southbury Station. yeah, well, that comes up a lot about stations, and again, it would be obviously all subject to SIL regs and so on and so forth. But again, I keep saying I want to pick it up, but I want to keep flagging it because I'm frightened to death that these things will get missed if I don't say it. Okay, and then very quickly on to the policy. On A, you've suggested a modification, so streetscape improvements, and then you've added to this to talk about prioritising pedestrian cycle connectivity, etc., and replacing existing footbridge over Southbury Road. So again, the modification doesn't necessarily tally to what I've just been told about the bridge, assuming it's the same bridge. So it's either can't have your cake and eat it. Either the modification to A is not quite right and needs to say and explore the potential for the bridge, or you take out 2 because it's just repeating it unnecessarily anyway. Have you got any views on it?
Yeah. So the proposed modification to A talks about replacing the footbridge where feasible, and I think that was the wording there was intended to talk about its, there needs to be discussions had between TfL, the local authority, and the developer to, realise the project.
Yeah, I know I'm like a stuck record on this, but we keep crashing up against this like repetition, don't we? It's like you've got, how many different ways can you describe a certain outcome, and it might be that you read it as plan as a whole, you can sort of understand where you're coming from, but I would say must explore the potential. If I squint and say, well, yeah, okay, is the same arguably as where feasible, but it's not, is it? Because it's different things, isn't it? It might be entirely feasible to do it, but when exploring the potential, they decide not to. For whatever, for other, financial reasons, I suppose it's not feasible. But, yeah, there's a plea to stop repeating yourself would be it's a plea which is several years too late, probably. But stop repeating yourself.
Thank you, sir. That's noted.
But yeah, so maybe something needs tweaking there to make it at least consistent. And then any proposals affecting the A10 or its frontage must be agreed with Transport for London. Well, yes, but again, that's not really something for policy. Presumably, a plan, TfL are part of any planning application, and developer would be very sensible for a developer to be talking to TfL about things, but it's the council that makes the decision at the end of the day, isn't it? So it's not TfL. So probably some tweaking there, and there must be no direct access for parking or servicing from the A10. We talked about this in relation to a site, Greenbelt site, the other day, whether or not that is, again, is that intentional? Counts. I mean, I don't. Again, someone will have to, maybe the site promoter will tell me whether that's fundamentally problematic in this case or not. The site we talked about, the Greenbelt site, not taking access from an A10 is pretty fatal to the scheme. So the question here would be, would it be similarly fatal to the scheme to not have access from the A10?
That is a requirement that TfL did indicate they'd prefer to be included. So we kind of took that forward and decided to propose it as a modification to the policy on that basis.
Looking at the inset map, there is Great Cambridge Road is the A10, isn't it? Yep. So am I right in looking at this? There is no current access into the site off the A10.
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay. So it shouldn't be fatal to the scheme. Okay. I'm not going to talk about E, even though I have reservations. F, slightly different approach to tall buildings. They must locate tall buildings along the A10 and Southbury Road if proposed. So again, so I suppose that's reflecting the fact there's no absolute requirement for them to be tall buildings here. It's not an expectation, it's just a, okay. And G, must locate the tallest buildings of up to 42 metres in height at the junction between the A10 and Southbury Road, with height decreasing, etc., etc. So they're not mutually exclusive, those sort of things. We're sort of saying must locate tall buildings if proposed, and then G, must locate the tallest building of up to. Again, use of the word must when it comes to tall buildings, whereas all the other ones we talked about this morning is should. Is the implication saying must? That means you are expecting a tall building up to 42 metres.
Yeah, I think on reflection there would be some benefits to combining requirements F and G and just tying them back strongly to policy DE6 and the requirements of Appendix D, just to make that clear to the applicant and decision maker.
Yes, probably some logic there. I'm not going to get in too much into the actual height of 40. Well, I think somebody probably are reflecting whether 42 metres is suitable here. I've heard, but we are going to, obviously when we get into D6, look at this approach you've taken in a more holistic way, so whether it's appropriate or not. So, but is there anything particular you want to say about why 42 metres here is appropriate? Is it the nature of the surroundings and so on?
Yes, thank you, sir. The rationale behind the tall building area in Southbury is around, I guess, with the Coliseum Retail Park site at the kind of as a consented scheme with a tall building at the centre of the placemaking area, and the affordance of the Great Cambridge Road and the A10 as well as Southbury Road being such large pieces of infrastructure. There's the physical space to kind of have a taller building. There's that kind of it's not as sensitive an area, so to speak, and this is part of the kind of encouragement of development in this area to encourage tall buildings and make use of that that ability to use that open space of the infrastructure. That being said, whilst we are encouraging that development, this isn't one of the borough's major centres. It's not yet. It's not a town centre. It's not. Has got a train station and bus services, but it's not as well connected as other parts of the borough and other placemaking areas. So we are encouraging a step change and transformational change in this area, but not to the same extent as somewhere else that is perhaps more established and also better connected and serves a more important civic or economic function. So the 42 metres does follow on from the kind of pinnacle of the development, which is of the placemaking area, which is set around the Coliseum Retail Park site. So it's kind of stepping down from that, but marking that big corner.
So as an aside, we've got this. I was told this morning that the council, I guess, is less confident in Coliseum. So the council is suggesting the policy for Coliseum Retail Park will remain, but less confident about delivery in that. So would that have any bearing on if the sites around this area are taking their cue from, say, if I've understood that correctly, is that right? The Coliseum Retail Park is the centre, is sort of the central focal point for tall building, and then everything would step down from that. Is that right? I got that right?
So I suppose when we drafted the plan, that permission was
which is
so,
fine.
Yeah,
I suppose my point is, if that doesn't come forward as envisaged or doesn't come forward at all, does that alter your views on the suitability of these sites for these heights, or is it sort of it doesn't rely on the Coliseum Retail Park coming forward in the way that it was envisaged? These stand on their own merits, if you like, for that height.
Yeah, so I guess the character of growth study, which informed the tall buildings policy, didn't necessarily look at. It was kind of like it took a degree of. It wasn't looking at particular site allocations or particular development sites per se. It was looking at the transformation of whole character areas. So we, through that evidence-based process, we would still consider this entire area, as we've proposed, would be suitable for tall buildings.
Thanks. I mean, you can imagine my mind if you said, right, we've got this vision and it's this and it comes down, but that never happens and you've got this, it might not. But
think there could be a tall building there which isn't residential use, for instance. So there could be a different form of that, but we still think it could accommodate that.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily have to come forward as Colosseum
As
Retail Park
envisaged.
proposed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. On H, I think this is one of my standard sort of comments. Carefully consider privacy overlooking overshadowing. Well, yes, you must carefully consider, but I don't think that's what you. I mean, somebody could say, we've carefully considered it, but we're not going to provide any privacy, and we're going to really have massive amounts of overshadowing and so on. So, I think what we talked about before. I think what you're actually seeking to do is ensure the living conditions of existing residents are adequately protected, or words to that effect. So, yeah.
Yes, sir, or should not harm, or some words to that effect.
Yeah, unacceptable harm, undue harm. If you say harm, then there might be some harm, but it might be within the realms of acceptability. Okay, that's my standard spiel on that, I think. And then parking, the old chestnut of parking. So the submitted plan is parking. It should provide limited parking, and then we have this stuff about on-street parking, et cetera. And then we've got a suggested modification, which is parking should be minimised across all proposed uses, including residential, commercial, and the re-provision of leisure uses. So to ensure consistent with the London plan. So my reading of the modification here, which is sort of more clearly worded, I think some of them is that it's relating any parking provision to the London plan. So it's not so in terms of the re-provision of non-commercial uses, it would be deferring to the London plan to whatever that says about that. So it's not saying car free, or it might be. Yeah. So in the context of what does minimise mean, or what does limited mean, that means being in line with the London plan is my reading of this. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into why the London plan hasn't done this, but there are certain uses that the London plan, as I become more familiar with the London plan, doesn't have standards for, but it does have policies for them. So that's fine. We've talked about the inset maps and the relationship with the policy. That's probably, again, something nice to be picked up as a generic point. And then I also mentioned this morning things about social infrastructure and stuff, which actually is referred to, of course, in PL2, social infrastructure and non-residential uses and local centres stuff, not necessarily picked up in this this policy. So if this, for example, if I was to take the inset map of this, beg pardon everybody, and I look at the 3.2, it may be part of this is around the bend between the A10. So there's a dotted line. If the dotted line is, I can't read what the dotted line is. But if that's what's supposed to be, what you're referring to is the sort of potential for new active frontages or new development facing the road, creating some kind of linear centre, then SA 2.4 doesn't really reflect that, does it? Do you think? Or does it? And I've missed something.
I think it does. I think it's just the issue of referring back to the key, potentially. But on the inset map for SA 2.4, there's a kind of dark blue line forming the perimeter of, it looks like there's some blocks with the hatch around it. And that is showing an active frontage with a non-residential use at ground floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's back this when I was getting confused about criterion 2 in PL2 about reference to local centres, and then PL3 criterion 3 criterion 3 about how non-residential uses are all going to work together, and you pointed me to what 3.2 shows, and that's, if you like, clear there maybe, and then it's about this making it all very clear. So I think 2.4, somewhere on the criteria, it probably does need to at least draw some allusion to criteria 2 and 3 if it's relevant, and the inset map and figure 3, all these things, how they tie together. So there's no scope for, or less scope for ambiguity and misinterpretation. Okay, so sorry for those waiting patiently to say what they want to say about that, but it's often better for me to get all my questions out of the way so we can you can hear everything the council gets to say and then come back. So is there anything you wish to raise?
Yes, a few points to pick up. I think just to kick things off, and I try to do this as succinctly as possible, and I'll try to repeat what we've already set out in our Rec 19 submission and our hearing statement. Obviously, from Royal London's side, there's still strong support for placemaking ambitions for Southbury and this specific site allocation. I'd probably highlight that as part of the process that we've undertaken, and we're looking at the submission of a hybrid planning application over the next few months for this site, and just going back to the delivery timescales, that would mean that if approved, say 2026, Royal London could be on site by 2028, deliver the first homes by 2030, 2031, and maybe build out the site by 2033, 35. So it is definitely an available, suitable, and deliverable site. As part of the process that we've undertook, and it was an initial stage of feasibility testing, and then we're, for around 18 months now, have tested design options, tried to make most effective use of the site, and think that we fully understand the site's constraints, surrounding context, and the opportunities that it offers, which we've set out in our Rec 19 submission. I think it was paragraph 31. And as part of this process, we agreed a slightly altered master plan with the council's development management team in May 2024, which picked up on those constraints and how a site could realistically be delivered. We've included those changes in our Rec 19 submission, paragraph 33, and proposed a slightly altered master plan. As part of this process, and just going back to what was said, well, there's a legal requirement to currently to re-provide 155 parking spaces for the use of the leisure centre and the school. We've been pushed to test whether residential accommodation could be built on top of that, but that would cause undue harm, we think, on surrounding residents, so that option has been disregarded. Now, looking at, I'm going to cover capacities and approach to heights first, respond to a couple of points that the council raised, and then pass on to Mr. Hutch to come back on the viability points. In terms of the capacities and building heights, as we've set out in our submission, we don't think that's currently in accordance with the NPPF Chapter 11, and particularly policies 123 and 124, 124D, because we don't think it makes effective use of a relatively unrestricted brownfield site, as the council have just said as well. The sites identified and the wider placemaking area are identified for transformational change, which would imply a change in character, fundamental change to urban form and identity. But we don't see that translated into the character of growth study that the council referred to, or in Appendix D. Mr. Kennedy just said, obviously there's been a bespoke study undertaken for this site. I'm not sure whether that's been published anywhere. We've seen reference to the character of growth study for this part of the placemaking area and the site allocation, which also looked at development beyond the site boundary, and the housing and employment land availability assessment, which included a reference to 605 homes and some replacement non-residential floor space. I'm not going to go over our view on the limitations of the character of growth study in much detail. That's set out in our submission. We don't think it explains how it got to the heights that are referred to in that document, or how the heights, once they were reduced, address any issues that were identified from the original heights that it included. But I think it's probably just worth pointing out that that study was prepared at a time when the Coliseum Retail Park permission, which sits just across the road from the site that we're looking at, has been granted around the same time, around 4 years ago today, actually. That permission established heights of several tall buildings across that placemaking area, including heights of up to 29 stories or 101 meters. If you look at the committee report, the GLA Stage 2 report, those heights in that placemaking area were considered acceptable and appropriate. I think there was no to limited harm identified on local views. The heritage harm was identified at the lower end of less than substantial. The character of growth study, which was apparently prepared at around the same time, did not take any of that into account, that established baseline, to then look at acceptable heights across that placemaking area. So it's not that the heights had to be halved from what was approved for that side in order to make them acceptable from a heritage or townscape perspective. As part of our submission, we included, and that's completely understand that our side has to come forward regardless of what happens at Colosseum Retail Park. But as part of our submission, we submitted, that was Rec 19 stage. It was a year ago. The design development wasn't as advanced as it is now. It wasn't as robustly tested as it is now. But we included environmental notes in terms of daylight sunlight, townscape and heritage, transport, and social infrastructure capacity, looking at 1,000+ homes on this side, all of them considering that such height would be acceptable, subject to obviously making sure that a scheme could provide sufficient play space, adequate living standards for new residents, and not cause undue harm on surrounding residents. And that's particularly important when you then look back at NPPF paragraph 123, which says policies should promote an active use, an effective use of land in meeting the needs for homes and other uses in a way that makes as much use as possible of previously developed land or brownfield land. And then if you add paragraph 124D, especially where this would help to meet identified needs for housing where land supply is constrained and available sites could be used for effectively. Going back to previous sessions you had looking at Enfield's housing supply and the trajectory being pushed back. I would add to that that as part of our process, we consulted with the GLA. The GLA said they're content with this site exploring capacities greater than those identified in the draft allocation, and that higher capacities are deemed acceptable. We're just waiting for feedback on the subsequent second pre-application meeting we had with them, which should be available imminently. A few points, a few responses on what Mr. Kennedy said. I think in terms of dual and single aspect units, we haven't provided any figures of the exact dual aspect proportions within the scheme to the council, so I'm not sure where the 87% comes from. I don't think it's as drastic as that, and regardless, I would probably refer to the Mayor's Accelerating Housing Delivery, Planning and Housing practice note from December 2024, paragraph 9.4, which specifically refers to the dual aspect issue in developments and getting developments underway that are otherwise challenging to deliver. In terms of the land use requirements, the first point you picked up, I think we're in agreement that any non-residential uses on this site should be compatible with a residential development and proportionate to the size of the development that it's serving, plus also looking at surrounding provision, and a future submission from our side would have done those tests. Similarly, social infrastructure, looking at what the existing supply is, plus the demand generated by development, and where something may be provided on-site or contributed to for off-site provision. The final point I would probably make now before I pass on to Mr. Hatch is in relation to infrastructure requirement 2 that was discussed, relating to the exploration of whether that footbridge should be removed or replaced. we don't have an issue with that. We've prepared proposals that could work with and without that footbridge being in place. It would ultimately be in the outline element of the scheme, so or abut the outline element of the scheme, so the detailed design coming forward at the time could respond to that. We're in discussions with the council's transport team on this, TfL, but also with the school that sits to the north of our side, who expressed that the footbridge is something that is well used by the school kids, and they might have some reservations about whether this would go or not. But yeah, we think it could work with and without that.
Thank you. Okay, so in respect of viability, our position as set out in our hearing statement is that the 605 unit allocation isn't in any way viable and deliverable at this site. Appreciate what officers just noted there, that we haven't submitted a viability assessment yet. That reflects the stage in the process that we were at when the representations were submitted. Therefore, it does follow that the only evidence available to the inquiry is the council's local plan study, and that really, sort of brings us on to the crux of our issue here, which is the fact that the local plan study doesn't justify in any place that this allocation would be viable and deliverable. I mean, the first point to make really is the study doesn't include any large site typologies in the mid-value central area. So the largest typology tested is the 300.
Sorry, I'm just gonna say one thing before we get into detail on this. We discussed the whole plan viability assessment in stage 1, and there was a whole session dedicated to discussing that. So if you'd got, with respect, if you'd got comments about that in terms of getting to the nub of the methodology and the approach, that was the time to raise it, because that would have meant that other people could have been here to listen to that and respond, and the council could have had their expert here to respond to that. So while I accept that you might want to raise viability concerns about, about the scheme, it's a little bit unfair to start raising some of that, if you like, underlying methodological issues or like at this stage when there was an entire matter dedicated to, is the whole plan viability assessment robust? So bear that in mind. Obviously the council's the person who drafted that document isn't here to defend themselves or respond to it. So the council may not be able to respond to some of these points.
Yeah.
So
okay, no, that's fine. Fully appreciate that the council's advisor isn't here to respond. But there are just a few points of observation around that study, and specifically how it relates to the site allocation. So I'm happy to sort of stay away from the detail of the assessment, but look, I think the key point really from our perspective is this this typology hasn't been tested within the study, and the results within the study, and I'll just give you a page reference, which is page 165 of that study, where the results for this area are set out. You'll see that none of the flatted development typologies are viable, according to the council's own study. So from our perspective, really, there is no evidence at the moment which shows that the allocation is viable, and there are no typologies that have been tested which can be reviewed to arrive at that conclusion.
So let's, all right, that's your point. I don't want to get into say that's your, and I've got a lot of this in your representations and your statements, so I don't need to take me through those again. So logical conclusion of that then for the plan, the site comes out, it's not deliverable.
It's in terms of remedy from our perspective is increasing the allocation. So,
But if that's not, well, sorry, so but if we take the view that, if I took the view that the council's right about the impact or the effect of 600 dwellings, or more than 600 dwellings, shall we say, then is the logical conclusion then that the site has to come out? Because you can't deliver a suitable form of development. It's not viable, if it wouldn't be viable.
Can I come in on that quickly? I think the conclusion would be that it wouldn't be viable at this point in time. So the delivery timescales that I set out earlier may not be achievable. And could I just add one more point, just in response to the densities, just to add a second perspective onto that. If you look at the site allocation for Colosseum Retail Park on the other side of the road, the 1587 homes, I think comes out at 378 units a hectare, which even 1,000 homes on this side would sit below that.
Okay, well, the council can respond to that. But I'd say, so is there anything, I mean, other than you telling me why it's not viable, so is there anything else you want to say? I just wanted to sort of circumvent a lot of figures, which say the council may not be able to come back on and before me anyway. And I can obviously take all that away and determine whether I want the council to provide any more information. But obviously my main interest is, well, is why isn't the information justified? That's one thing, but also what is the outcome of that? I understand you want it to be, but if the outcome is we need it to be more development, but that actually results in unacceptable form of development, that's not necessarily a sound outcome, is it?
okay. Yeah, look, I think from our perspective, as long as there is clarity that the 605 isn't a maximum, and any future planning application will be, considered on its own merits. It will take into account the detailed viability evidence supported with the application. Then we're content with that position. But we just we want that to be a point that's agreed, that this isn't sort of a maximum or anything that will dictate what the planning application coming forward needs to replicate.
Any application, I mean, that's standard in planning, isn't it? Any application subject to a viability assessment, you can always argue why something isn't justified, or the council can do. And again, if you came and said, well, we can only deliver you 1% affordable housing, then it's for the council to decide whether or not, on the basis of that, they're content with that and can deliver that. And the council has accepted that 605. I mean, there's a difference. It depends how you phrase it. If it's a minimum of 605, it could be significantly more. It could be more than that. The only absolute constraint I see in the policy is the maximum height of 42 metres, and that's something the London Plan has required the council to impose, a maximum in some of these locations. So obviously the council come back on that, but it makes it quite difficult. I will accept it makes it quite difficult for the council to. I mean, I think it's unreasonable for the council to be cautious about heights and say, well, 100 metres is okay, because that's significantly different. That's doubling the size, and the potential impacts of that are going to be quite significant. So I can see why the council might want to be slightly cautious about that, but they also have their hands tied by the London Plan, which tells them they've got to put a maximum on it. So there's a problem. I might concede, if I was looking at this from first principles, that the logical thing to do would be to assess the impact of development when an application comes in, without necessarily imposing that restriction. But that's not what the London Plan requires. So, say far be it from me to say anything about the London Plan and how helpful it is in that regard. I mean, there's always going to be, the question is, for me, not whether or not there's an alternative approach to this site, is whether what the council has done is unsound. And obviously, you've explained to me why you think it's unsound, because it's not comparable to other schemes or the shortcomings in the evidence. And you've explained to me why you think the whole plan viability assessment is not. Say my difficulty is you're raising things which really it would have been better. I mean, obviously the matters, issues, and questions went out to everybody. You had the opportunity to see if there was something there. I understand why you might think you wanted to keep your powder dry to this session, but if you're coming into very much about methodological issues, because obviously what you're saying might have implications for the whole plan. Because if you're suggesting the whole plan viability assessment is not robust in any way, shape, or form, then that's wider than this allocation, isn't it? And that's opening cans of worms beyond. I don't know if that's your intention or not.
No, I think just as a sort of final point, it was really just pointing out there's no evidence at the moment that shows the allocation 605 would be viable and deliverable. So I think that that sets the scene for any future planning application, that the local plan process hasn't established 605 as a viable and deliverable scheme on this site.
So by the same token, there's no evidence to say it isn't, is there? Because I've got you telling me it isn't. I've got no figures in front of me to that effect, have I? No, I'm not saying asking for them either.
No, definitely not. Definitely not disputing that. But I think we're just conscious of there is a planning application coming forward on this site. It will not be at 605 units because that isn't viable and deliverable at any level of affordable housing. So there will be a high density scheme coming forward, and that's the scheme that has been, is going through the process and has been discussed with the GLA in detail.
Who will make the decision here, GLA or Enfield, or will that be up to what happens when it comes in?
Enfield, with the GLA.
It will be with notification of the GLA.
The other complication here, because I'm not here to determine your planning application for you and say whether or not what you're proposing is acceptable. That's the other thing. I'm here to, is the policy sound? If you want to come in with the plan won't be adopted. If you're coming in the next few months, the plan won't be adopted. So it'll be obviously up to various parties to decide what weight to give to this plan at the status it has. But even then, if the plan was adopted and you came in with something different, then it'd be up for various people to make your case and for council to decide it and consider whether section 38(6) kicked in or not for those purposes, because you've made a sound case for that. So, it doesn't necessarily rule out what you're talking about, I don't think, but you're focusing very much on what you want to do, and fair enough, you have portrayed it in this kind of is the policy sound or not, but there's a bit of a grey area here about, well, this is what we're going to do. Well, there's no one stopping you putting a plan. Obviously, no one's going to stop you putting a plan application in. So is there anything else either of you want to make, points you want to make? No. So do you want to come back on those points?
Thank you very much. So thank you. Yes, the approach that's taken by the objector is essentially one that can be determined all through the planning application. There's no need to determine those issues at this stage, principally because we've been clear about the fact that the allocation is for an approximate estimated housing capacity. And if it's then being contended that it should be higher, well, it can be justified in the usual way. And there is, of course, a restriction at G with regard to heights. And if there's a case that's being presented that it's appropriate in the circumstances to go higher than that, then well, that's a matter of justification, again, at the application stage. And I think it's important that one notes the way the GLA, because it's been reported by Mr. Shealy, I think, that GLA supported the approach, a pre-app, I think he said. I think that's right. But it's important to note that the GLA took the view that there's the potential for a development quantum stroke residential density greater than envisaged. I think that's quoting from the GLA. And that they said that comprehensive options testing should be undertaken. So there's it's a little more than simply a fulsome acceptance of the position. It's that the investigation should be undertaken, which of course is consistent with what will happen ultimately if a planning application is put in. It will then be considered by the GLA, who will reach a conclusion as to whether that's the appropriate approach. But it doesn't require a conclusion, and shouldn't lead to the conclusion that the various requirements of our plan are unsound. And the same goes with regard to the arguments around this being that's to say the proposal for 1,000 units and above being optimization, because the MPPF is clear that there should be optimization, not maximization. And it's not a matter so that you're going to be able to resolve through this process to say that, yes, the only sound allocation here is 1,000 units. There's just not the evidence before you. Part of the case is being presented as a viability case of which there's no evidence at all to justify the conclusion. So, the only question for you is, well, the drafting that is in the plan, is that sufficient to provide the promotion of this site, as both parties want, in a way that is sound and will not preclude appropriate development coming forward? And it doesn't, in short. So it's effective in that sense. So that's what I'd say by way of the initial comments. Mr. Kennedy may want to say something about what's been said by Mr. Shealy with regard to the specific analysis that he's undertaken that you've heard him describe when he was first setting out the position. Mr. Kennedy, do you want to say anything more about what you've undertaken?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I've seen that my microphone was off, so it didn't then get through to anybody online, I think, unless it was switched off because Mr. Kennedy pressed the button. It was that. There we are. There we are. You're the most important person.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. So just on the, I think the question was around why wasn't the Coliseum Retail Park taken as just the baseline for that proposal in the character of growth, and that where did the height come from in the study? And I think it's worth understanding what the scope of the study, which is purely urban design, heritage, townscape analysis, looking at tall buildings and thinking about it in those terms only. So the Coliseum Retail Park site was obviously consented and a planning balance taken as to why it was acceptable. I think, going through the case officer report, whilst it was on balance acceptable, that the height and etc. was fine, and the heritage impact was less than substantial at the lower end, it still had other benefits such as 30% affordable housing. So there was a lot of other things going on there. It wasn't just purely height. And I think when we looked at the character of growth study and looking at height, we were thinking about the borough as a whole, like where this site sits within the entirety of the urban hierarchy, essentially. And, the kind of development, the density which Mr. Shealy was talking about, 376 at Coliseum Retail Park, whilst that was judged acceptable, is something that is more appropriate, something like an example we pulled out just as a comparison was Keybridge House in Vauxhall. So that's a lower density, 342 dwellings per hectare, but again, just a really prominent tall building in the middle of Zone 1. And I guess we're looking at this area in terms of character, urban design, heritage. This bit of evidence base said that's not really the kind of scale development we want here, but that could be balanced off against other requirements in the plan. And I think it is just worth noting that through the pre-app, we haven't yet received a kind of affordable housing offer from this scheme at all. So again, we're comparing that to Coliseum Retail Park, which did have a limited offer. And again, that scheme also had 57% studios and one beds, which isn't really what we're looking for in terms of our housing needs requirement, and it has lapsed as well and isn't viable, which we'll probably hear about later. So, I mean, we do want, as Mr. Shealy said, we do want a transformation of this site, and we think that what we put forward in our feasibility and evidence base does accommodate that. We're going from a retail park to 605 homes and tall buildings. Yeah.
Thank you. One thing that just occurs to me, it's been mentioned a couple of times in relation to the Coliseum Retail Park, and the height there is the heritage. Now, we'll talk about that later when we get onto that policy. It was a question whether or not, because of the proximity of this site to whether similar heritage issues are in play. It's not really referred to in the policy. I don't think heritage and the little RAG rating says not located in immediate proximity to conservation or listability. So I took it that it wasn't an issue here, but I know you've mentioned it in relation to the Coliseum Retail Park rather than here, but whether or not there are, if you get to a certain height, if you like, there would be factors, and again, just whether the policy should be just making that clear as a belt and braces thing.
I don't think so, actually, because this site isn't, it doesn't really affect any heritage assets, except when you get to that height of Colston Retail Park, which was affecting certain long-range views from elsewhere.
That's fair enough. I just wanted to, I heard it a couple of times, I didn't want to let it go without mentioning it.
So could I also just add one extra point? So I think one of the points made by the developer was around just our assessment of dual aspect, and they haven't provided us with those numbers. And I just want just to reassure you, sir, that we do have the competence within the team to make our own assessment of these schemes, and that we are working with the adopted guidance of the London Plan, and that's what we have to work within as a service. Thanks.
I'm always pleased to hear that the DM people are looking at these things, or development officers are looking at these things. Don't have to always need something written out for you. You're making your own judgments on things. Absolutely. Okay. The other thing I just want to mention is there anything you want to come back on about the point about, as I say, I don't want to. You haven't got. I know his name escapes me, but the gentleman who was very patient, both at Cruise Hill and Chase Park, sitting here till 6:30 every night, here to sort of refute any comments made about the robustness of the viability assessment. Well, particularly, I suppose, the argument that the document doesn't require, even though it's several hundred pages long, doesn't contain the sufficient breadth of typology to take this sort of location into account. Just so when I go away and look at these things in the round and see if I need to come back on anything, I've got your approach to that, your answer to that.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. So could you just bear with me one moment while I just find one document I was wanting to... Thank you. I was just wanting to get the viability appraisal up before I dealt with it. Mr. Drummond-Hay, by the way, it's the person you were after. Yes. So the viability update that you have and on which the plan is based looked at a typology-based analysis, and a number of points were made in the comments of the objectors, which on the face of it have the potential to go to the question of the appropriateness of the analysis undertaken by Mr. Drummond-Hay. And it would be obviously wrong in circumstances where this issue, or the issue rather of viability, came up in stage 1, for the council to have to address those sorts of points now. The specifics of the responses that may be necessary to be made in respect of some of the arguments that have been put forward are ones that Mr. Drummond-Hay would need to be given an opportunity to speak to. The most important of which is, I think, we said at the start, that the typology for this site wasn't in fact assessed. And the second was, well, what was assessed actually showed a lack of viability, both the second of which I'd need to take instructions on, the first of which certainly Mr. Drummond-Hay would have to give a response to. Our ostensible position is that the viability appraisal is appropriate for the purposes for which it was provided, which is to look at an entire plan and assess the viability of various sites, many and various sites that have been promoted through the plan and decided upon. It would be wrong to seek to import the sorts of site-specific viability appraisal criticisms to a whole plan viability appraisal that's taken that much broader approach, but which is nevertheless sufficient for its purpose. But so the reason I made the observations I did at the start, namely that if there's a viability case that's to be argued about, it can be argued about at the application stage, is to avoid having to reopen all of these questions and debate and, if necessary, give further evidence on them. So we think that you're going to be able to bypass that question by way of a conclusion that this can and will be dealt with through the application processes. So that's the ostensible approach that we'll be taking, subject to you requiring us to do more. Okay.
My standing practice, if there's further questions at the end of this, I will ask them via writing, and then if need be, if there's needs to go out to the people who are here, or those or indeed earlier sessions where we're related to talked about this, then so be it. We'll have is there any other questions, any points on SA 2.8 before I, sorry, 2.4 even before we have a break? No, thank you. So we'll come back at 4:05 and we'll do 2.4 and then go through the rest. So thank you. So it is 2.8. You're interested in, so yeah. I think it was 2. I was thinking of 2.2 because I had statements relating to 2.2. So 2.8 then is the Martin Bridge even industrial estate. Sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry. This is where it gets confusing, isn't it? Because it's not in. It's not. And it's in. I have to bear with me. So it's in part of the plan. Part of my plan's collapsed. And so it's on a loose piece of paper somewhere, so I need to find, I need to use my backup copy. One of those things that not doing it chronologically was probably a really good idea at the time, and sort of sensible. Someone could remind me of the page number. 517, thank you. Right. So we have an existing employment site with scope for intensification, or I think that's what's it's referred to as being, with a net increase of 26,328 square metres in the land use requirement, which is very specific, and then the estimated capacity is a minimum of 25,000. So it's all, I suppose, 26,000 is a minimum of 25,000, but it's all a bit confusing.
Yeah, I think the council's accepted that there's a slight typo between the two, and it should just be 25 for both. Oh, yes. So yeah, Richard Pestel, partner planning Rapley's on behalf of the council.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the modifications section. I don't think there are any.
If there are any modifications for 2.8.
No. Okay. So yes, there needs to be just so it should be a minimum of 25,000. Is that the land use requirement? Okay.
Yes.
And this is so. This is what I've referred to as employment on employment. So the question, I guess, first thing is why is it being allocated? Is there any particular purpose in allocating it? I know elsewhere it's been just about providing a certain degree of certainty and comfort, but would there be anything stopping development on this site coming forward?
No, I think the site was promoted to the borough for an intensified redevelopment scheme at earlier stages of the plan process. The reason the borough has it allocated in the way that it does is that, setting aside our greenbelt releases, the only way that a constrained London borough can meet its quantified industrial needs is through allocating sites for intensification over the plan period. There's a bit of a bone of contention with some of the site promoters who, in the interests of flexibility, generally would like to see all the intensified floor spaces removed from policy, leaving them as net additional zeros. And of course, if we do that, we're not following our reading of policy E7 of the London Plan, which requests that we take a proactive approach to securing intensification capacity. The word proactive is used several times in that policy in the sense of seeking intensification, multi-storey redevelopment, and following a evidence-based process to arrive at quantified numbers for plan allocations. So I don't know if you want me to go into the background of the intensification evidence.
Well, I've got a general question, I suppose, about whether or not that is generally achievable to deliver this level of increase and so on and so forth. So I mean, it might help to how you've got to that number. And
So to go alongside the London Plan, the current London Plan, the GLA have released various bits of guidance over time, starting with the 2017 Industrial Primer, which set a set of typologies for boroughs to explore through their site allocation finding process, so including multi-deck. It's generally multi-deck industrial. As we've mentioned previously, the GLA does not count mezzanine floor space towards its industrial needs. It considers the inclusion of mezzanine floor space within schemes is subject to the occupier's demands. It doesn't secure net additional floor space. They encourage boroughs only to count actual net additional floor space. I know that's been an issue all the way through the London Plan, even when it was being examined itself. So the GLA set out a series of typologies through their intensification primer. The borough, building on what was then emerging policy E7 of the London Plan, commissioned AECOM to undertake a borough-wide intensification study, which looked at virtually every scrap of industrial land the borough had. It tried to apply GLA typologies to that land, so looking at the current layout of the lands, the current plot ratios, what goes on around them, some consideration of what scale and massing might be appropriate for these sites, and it attached quantums to those. They are multi-deck proposals. That work was taken forward slightly later through some Stantec work, which I was involved with, which looked to refine those capacities and just to try to apply a little bit more common sense to them, building on what was being promoted to the borough at the time. So trying to find those sites which developers were looking actively to redevelop, and then looking further at the typologies to identify a floor space, a reasonable floor space figure for them based upon those typologies. So this site, through the AECOM work, was identified for a net additional 26,000. That's the detailed number in the policy. That fell within the range of floor space that was being promoted to the borough through earlier plans. The maximum envelope promoted was up to 75,000 square metres, which I think there's about 25,000 on site. So drawing on the AECOM evidence, drawing on the Stantec evidence, the policy wasn't drafted at the top end of that. The policy was drafted at the 25,000 square metres net additional. So the borough always accepts that intensification is incredibly challenging, and incredibly challenging in this market at this point in time. But it runs core to the strategic London Plan policies, and it runs core to the only way that the borough can secure net additional floor space and London as a whole. But as you'll see from reps, it's not generally liked by site promoters because it removes the flexibility, or that it's seen to remove the flexibility to redevelop the sites and just simply replace what's there. And I think the suggestion, not necessarily in these reps, but it's in other industrial reps, that we can comply with the London Plan policy by delivering replacement floor space plus 1 square metre. Now, the borough doesn't think that aligns with the positivity in E7 of the London Plan and the London Plan more generally. So we accept it's challenging, we accept it's difficult, and especially in the current market with build costs, structural steel costs, stuff that we've discussed elsewhere. But we're looking at our plan period, and without resorting 100% to greenbelt releases, it seems an appropriate balance at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I guess I can be. I've got some points here about delivery, although obviously there's no requirement. We're not talking about the same thing as housing, so it's just more out of interest, I suppose, and how it fits in. Obviously, there may be some assistance with that later. I will jump straight into the policy. I've nothing on the infrastructure requirements because they are, again, subject to what we've been talking about all morning and all day about SIL requirements and everything else I was phrased, but no particular questions on those. On B, I think you've just actually probably answered this question. My question on B was, it talks about should seek to deliver multi-level intensified development with a focus on the needs of logistics occupiers. You probably just answered that, whether it's realistic or deliverable. But I guess your point. So I suppose question that somebody you might want to pick up on this is that the only way of delivering a net increase of 25,000 though would be to do that. There's no realistic opportunity to do that without being multi-level.
Yes, because the borough's plot ratios are already generally very high, so it isn't a case that we've got wasted land on the industrial sites that we can infill on. If we're going to secure a net additional and a step change in the delivery of industrial floor space, we had to take a leap. We can't just incrementally just add a few metres onto every site. It has to be something quite big. And of course, the larger sites in the borough, the larger redevelopment sites, are the ones that are most likely to be suitable for a multi-storey development because you can get the ramps in them or the lifts if that's been the appropriate solution to that site. So we would struggle to intensify and deliver industrial floor space on the smaller sites. So these larger ones, and this is just shy of 5 hectares, I think it's 4.7, that starts becoming the size where you can afford to lose some land to the infrastructure that you might need to get that solution for it. When we looked at when we took the ACOM evidence a little bit further, one thing we did do quite specifically was you can secure an awful lot of, in theory, intensified floor space by putting very light industrial units and workshops on top of sheds, in theory, but that doesn't really reflect the drivers of demand in Enfield. We're not a big, strong workshop economy. We are an industrial logistics economy, hence why the policies are directing towards logistics, trying to find solutions for logistics as opposed to pepper potting small units everywhere, which we would prefer to cluster in Meridian Water or town centres or elsewhere rather than have these light uses intermixed just because it might be easy to put a corner of an office building on the corner of your site, or it might be easy to put a lighter mix on top of something, but we know that doesn't really reflect our demand. So some of the ACOM schemes were slightly re-specified to meet the market demand for industrial, to get the ramps and the lifts in.
Okay, thank you. The limit here, or this is a slightly different way of looking at things again, could consider heights of up to 39 metres for industrial intensification. I suppose from a urban design perspective, that's something we can pick up in DE6, and there might obviously be the normal reference to DE6. From what you're talking about, is it realistic? Is that the kind of thing? Yeah, well, I suppose you could consider isn't you must. So you could consider it, but are you like, is the thing you're talking about really, I mean, 39 metres being, you know, was it 14 stories or more, or something like that? Is it that sort of thing? You're not going to get a 14-storey logistics building, presumably. It might be multi-level, but not that multi-level.
I think the heights are related to the borough's general design principles. I think it should be 36 as opposed to 39. There's a typo throughout the plan, but that's what's limiting that. It isn't a consideration of the industrial capacity. It's a wider design constraint.
I mean, you could argue, I suppose, it's not really necessary to make that reference at all because you're not going to get tall buildings coming forward for what you're proposing. But I suppose
it's unlikely, but you don't know.
Well,
because actually one of the big issues is whether you rely on goods lifts or decks and ramps. Our general preference here, reading the market, is ramps because we're about vans, etc. And goods lifts, you can go very high with them. You can get 7, 8 odd stories once you're out. Once you're into the world of lifts, it's different. But of course, one thing we're always told by occupiers is lifts are fantastic, but it's passed all the cost onto the occupier, onto the business, because they now have to unload a van, cart their stuff into a lift, move it upstairs. It's not generally liked. So it's this ramp solution if and where we can get it, which is the preference. But there is a tiny risk that you take that away and you could end up with something big that somebody's still saying meets an industrial need. Yes, we're just saying because the height limit is a design thing, so Mr. Kennedy can assist you further today.
No, I don't think I need. I think it's understood. And I say it's could anyway. So, and it would be relating back to D6 at some point. And I think if you look at D, D's of design issue. I suppose again, not necessarily anything to ask there. E, must safeguard the amenity of residents living at Lincoln Way. Yeah. Good. Albeit I'm not mad keen on what I mean. Yeah, there are things I would say about that, but at least know what you're trying to get there. And it's I would say that's a more successful form of words than the must minimise overlooking or other forms of words that have appeared. I still prefer living conditions if I'm absolutely honest, but that's to get into the point of again pedantry. You have got F, but then of course there's the must minimise overlooking existing regard. So you could argue that you don't really need F if you've got E, because you would assume E does the same thing. So I would probably strike through F, I would guess. And then G is interesting because it's not. I mean, this is the first. Well, it's not the first employment site we've come across, but don't think that form of words is used in relation to the Ramney Marsh and the site. You know, RUR03, RUR04, RUR05. So again, well, if it's purely because it's an industrial building and that's what you would expect on industrial buildings, then, you know, again, this is what I mean about we didn't have that discussion then because it wasn't flagged up, but it might be that if that's considered appropriate, then is it appropriate in those other locations as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's a locational thing. I think it's that it's appropriate for the big mass of the buildings with lots of roof space and to try to encourage the most efficient use of that. So you're right, it would apply elsewhere.
I mean, of course, you've got the, you'll have, which we haven't covered yet, the climate change and energy efficiency policies, which may or may not, without, of course, I've read them, but some time ago, refer to this anyway. again, there may be a need for a cross-reference, but can everybody else have a buzzing? Yes. Yeah, so just...
The air conditioning
Oh, is it? It's just
turned into a heating system, I think.
not much as me. And then one other point I've got, which is, well, my note is there's no mention of important views, unlike the last policy. Well, of course, when I was thinking about how we do this, the last policy was 2.7. So if the same may or may not apply to important views here, if you look at multi-use development, that will all tie back to, I guess, the building heights. So again, that might become more clear when we talk about 2.7.
Yes, sir, and I suspect that may apply to other allocations within Southbury.
Yes, because I think this is referenced, well, it is covered in, but I certainly think it is covered in, yeah.
That's right. So it is in 2.7, and 2.8 is within the King's Head Hill important local view. So
Same applies. And then finally, I said finally before, I think, but finally this time, no mention of parking at all, which again is a bit odd given all the discussions we've had about parking. So whether or not there's anything that's to be said about parking.
I think the difference is because it's expected that there'll be a logistics occupier here. There are different considerations that would apply in those circumstances. Perhaps Mr. Pestle has something to add to that. But
Yeah, you're right. I don't think we have any parking. I don't think we have any parking standards for these, but you would expect, given that the buildings are being comprehensively developed for logistics, of course the main thing is to make it work as a logistics building. If there's parking required, there'd be parking for vans and all sorts of other things as well. So a normal just car parking standard would not be appropriate. But if these things aren't delivered in a way that you can get your workforce to them, then they're no use to anybody.
Okay.
it's probably worthwhile noting that TfL's recorded comment, at least in the Statement of Common Ground, Reg 19 stage, is simply to welcome the contribution towards the bus service prioritisation and associated traffic management measures. But that's it.
So I think there'd be the logic then would it would defer to, as there's something specific, defer to T3, I think it is, which in and of itself defers to the London Plan, which actually doesn't have any parking standards for B2 or B8, and therefore allows it to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, which may well actually be the logical thing to do for something of this nature. So that's all. But again, you've got to go through this labyrinthine way of getting there.
I think that's sensible, even when you can see with this the range of floor space that has been promoted to the borough is quite a very large range. So it will be highly dependent upon the end layout and the end structure of the building, and also what its function is, because depending on the type of logistics that takes this space, you could have a very, very low employment count on it, because we always say the purpose of the industrial policies is not necessarily driven by the need for jobs. It's because they fill a very specific logistics function, which is wider than just contributing employment. So we've just got to allow that flexibility for warehouses with very few people working there that would have very few parking requirements versus an Amazon last mile delivery where it operates differently. So it is on its merits.
Okay, understood. Okay, any comments? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I suppose just to start, the landowner, my client, is supportive of the site allocation and indeed intensifying the industrial floor space on site and optimising the land. And that is supported by the fact that we have now submitted an outline planning application that was submitted on and validated on the 13th of June. We're yet to get consultee comments back, and obviously we're still going through that process, but the site is deliverable, and we are broadly supportive of the allocation. I think the main matter of difference, which we're here to represent today, is in relation to that minimum additional floor space, so that intensification figure of 25,000 square metres. What we believe is that it's overly prescriptive, setting any minimum floor space, and primarily because that is overly prescriptive and at odds with what we believe how you read paragraphs 86 and 87 of the MPPF, and specifically Part E of the MPPF. It's the floor space that has been set out in the allocation as the minimum intensification naturally sets a negotiative position for applicants to submit applications against, and it may not enable a rapid response to changes in economic circumstances, to cite paragraph 86 part E. But also just to acknowledge what Mr. Pastel was talking about in terms of how it relates to London Plan Policy E7, correct that the plan does, that policy does talk about encouraging the intensification of industrial floor space in London, especially in designated areas. However, it does not say anywhere that minimum floor space targets should be applied to individual sites, and more that sites should look at optimising through several different ways, whether that is multi-storey or other ways of intensification, not prescriptively a minimum floor space at a multi-storey level. What we did recommend in our representations was that the minimum floor space should be removed, and the policy should simply just state that the site should look to optimise, and yes, there should be a no net loss position, because the landowner, my client, does not want that for the site, and they would like it to be successful and optimised in that way. That's the main matter of difference that we had with the site allocation. We did also add that whilst we're in agreement with the design principles that were set out, and we have sought to achieve them in the outline that's currently pending, we do believe the diagram within the site allocation itself is overly prescriptive with regards to the location of some certain features, and really those features like the green buffer and routes through should come out of a planning application and design process. But they are our main thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. There is so you probably picked up, there's been some general discussions and views about the inset maps and the status they have and everything else. I think both, they'll have to be, I think the extent to which they are illustrative needs to be reflected. I don't think it would be just, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn if I've said this before, but generally speaking, I don't think it would necessarily be the case that the inset map should be seen as prescriptive. Because that potentially wouldn't be justified, I would say. They are there to be helpful, I suspect, but that isn't necessarily set out anywhere particularly clearly. It probably does need to be somewhere if it's not. Just a question on the point about the intensification figure, that you don't think the council should set a figure. One thing, the London Plan say that the council shouldn't set a figure? So it may not say you have to, but does it say you shouldn't?
No, it doesn't say you shouldn't, no.
Okay. And just in terms of what Mr. Pestel was saying about, well, obviously the council's got a employment land requirement of, it's a figure that's disappeared out of my brain, 300,000, yeah, 300 something thousand, isn't it? Some of which will be made by windfalls, I suppose, and things. But if they don't establish a figure in these policies, then how do you, what's your view on the consequence of that for meeting those requirements? Because let's take it from my perspective. The council's identified 3 greenbelt sites. What the exceptional circumstance has been put to me is that they're needed to deliver the amount of floor space that's required, ostensibly. I've got to decide whether that figure's acceptable or not. if we have allocations and don't actually specify any numbers, then how does that leave the plan in terms of, if you look at the overall effectiveness of employment land, just interested to see how, if we were to follow your approach, what you consider the consequence of that would be. Just interested in your views on that.
I think the unintended consequence of setting a minimum intensification floor space requirement could mean that no intensification will occur at all, depending on where the market is at the point in time of either putting in a planning application for reserve matters, in this case, or full planning. And that is on the basis with this site allocation and the numbers being put forward, and as has been intimated by Mr. Pestel, is that to achieve that floor space, it would be highly likely that multi-level would be required. And if the market conditions are not there for multi-level, which in London it is still a fairly new concept that definitely is not robust in the market by any means, then if the council want to be prescriptive with how they apply that minimum amount, then they may not get any intensification that could come forward by a smaller amount, say by a single story, but say intensified volumetrically, or by mezzanine, which is counted as floor space in planning applications.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, anything to come back on there? I mean,
No,
I think I've got a difference of views, and I've sounds like I've got, I know where you stand. I know where you stand. It may be that it has the implications where maybe site promoters aren't necessarily coming to see me, but coming before me, but the same points will apply.
It would do. I think I made the point earlier about volume and mezzanines, which the GLA doesn't accept for the purposes of drafting our policies. For right or wrong, that's the position given to the GLA.
Can I just add a couple of points, please? The first is in relation to the London plan policy position set out in E7 and the need at point A for development plans to be proactive and encourage the intensification of business uses in, amongst other things, B8, occupying all categories of industrial land through, and then it gives an indication of how that should happen, including through multi-storey schemes. And that indicates, at least on the face of it, that one should be identifying at particular sites intensification. At least it indicates that, and it's actually made clear in 6.7.1 of the written statement, where it says that boroughs are encouraged to explore the potential to intensify industrial activities on industrial land to deliver additional capacity. And then it goes on to deal with particular kinds of intensification that could lead to co-location, not relevant for present purposes. But that shows that the aim is, in terms of the Mayor's position, that there should be a consideration in the way that the Council's undertaken it here. So it's entirely consistent with policy to take the approach of identifying an approach that should be taken. So the only question then is, well, should there be a minimum figure given? And the question for present purposes is whether one has an effective policy that is positively drafted in order to circumvent some of the, or to encompass some of the tests of soundness. And it's worthwhile noting that the application that's been submitted in respect of the site is, I think, for the delivery of 68,000 square metres. If I've got that wrong, I'll no doubt be corrected, but with an uplift of 43,000 square metres. So there is an approach being adopted by the developer here that is foursquare in line with the policy itself, which is clearly suggestive of it not being an ineffective policy or one that is not positively drafted. Again, in the usual way, if there's a justification on some other basis that one shouldn't take the approach that is directed by the London Plan of intensification, i.e. should be at a much lower level, well then that can be justified at the application stage. But there needs to be a benchmark, in short. That's all I'd say in response.
Just in terms of the art of the possible, then. So if you think, well, you know, you might have in principle a view that the policy shouldn't be this prescriptive or this specific. But I guess if I'm thinking, well, you know, there's two angles to this. One, it's not justified in terms of London Plan policy or general effectiveness and national policy to have this figure, and then the other side of it, well, it's not justified because it wouldn't be deliverable. So if we just look at that side, I think we've done today, and the deliverable. Not obviously, I'm not involved. I don't want to get into too much in the outline. Permission application, it's not been granted, not been determined yet. But just is that the case? So the level of intensification would be broadly in line with what's being set out in the policy.
Yes, so we have submitted an outline planning application with a maximum parameter up to 68,000 square metres. The appetite from my client is absolutely to optimise and intensify the site. The primary reason of submitting an outline planning application is to ensure that at the point of submitting a reserve matters and implementing a planning application, there is sufficient flexibility to be able to redevelop the site in accordance with market requirements at that time. So whilst, yes, we believe the site can withstand and accommodate that amount of intensification, and we hope it does, we think setting that as a minimum intensification requirement is at odds with the MPPF in terms of paragraph 86 in being flexible and amenable to where economic circumstances change.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's a subtle but important difference between we don't think it should be prescriptive because we can't do it, and we don't want to be prescriptive because we want to maintain a degree of flexibility. Just out of, it doesn't really matter, but because I think the wording's practically the same, but I'm dealing with the, just so there's no avoidance of doubt, for the avoidance of doubt, the plan's been examined under the December 2023 framework, and I think 86 and 87 is in the December 2024 framework. I think the wording's the same, so it doesn't matter, but I just want to, okay, thank you for that point. Is there anything else you want to say about that? No?
No, acknowledge what it says about the need for flexibility, but of course our plan is flexibility, inherently flexible insofar as it allows for different approaches if they're justified.
Okay, plenty for me to think about, so thank you for that. By all means, leave if you want to leave, but I'm going to carry on. So I'm going to go back to 2.1 then, and Coliseum Retail Park. If you just, council may just want to, first and foremost, just take me through the implications of what it said in its note to me this morning. In terms of, so just to be clear, we're not talking here about removing the policy or suggesting the policy should be removed. It is about the policy staying in the plan, but no longer relying on it to meet needs.
Yes, so the position is a difficult one. It's fair to note because there is no longer the planning application, of course, or the planning permission rather, has lapsed, and there is no clarity as to how the site would ultimately come forward. That said, the retail park is an integral part of what's proposed for delivering transformational change within the Southbury area. And so the council doesn't want to lose sight of that, albeit that there are considerable difficulties with regard to what might happen ultimately on the site. As I say, there's no clarity as to how it would come forward. And in order to certainly reflect where we are with regard to the Colosseum site, at present there's an aspiration with regard to it. And the council will have to consider how best ultimately to reflect that in a policy that at least acknowledges its role in Southbury. But it means necessarily that the capacities that are identified in the housing element would have to come out of that, following on from what's said with regard to the trajectory. And it would follow from that it would probably be sensible for the implementation element of the allocation to be removed. But as I say, in terms of how that's specifically done, that would need some more thought and shorter. But as I say, the council finds itself in a difficult position with regard to that situation as it finds. Wanting on the one hand to encourage and on the other having to recognise the reality of what has occurred there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me to a certain extent it's not hugely different to some of the sites we've been talking about already today, where you've got an allocation, could have come forward, but there's no scheme, there's no, not particularly strong views on what the developer is or isn't doing, pushing some of these sites back in the trajectory because they're not, there's a certain lack of certainty maybe about what's happening. So I was not, there was no suggestion that Tesco, as an example, there's no suggestion that Tesco should come out in terms of the policy you're saying, but the numbers should be removed from the trajectory. There's still expectation that, well, we think there's a reasonable chance it's going to come forward in years 10 plus. So what you're saying here is, well, you've not even got that level of comfort that something could happen in the plan period.
Well, yes, Mr. Pestle will deal with this in terms of how the developer has indicated the position, but there's a multifaceted aspect to this insofar as there's a lapse planning permission. There are various representations being made with regard to the extent to which one can deliver or one could deliver that level of development, and whether it's appropriate in the circumstances to bring forward it and something else or something else entirely different. There's a lack of clarity around that, in short. But I'll leave that to Mr. Pestle in case I haven't stated that correctly. Mr. Pestle.
I think what sets this aside from some of the sites we were talking about earlier was that some of the sites earlier are delayed or they might tweak their housing numbers. But the Regulation 19 reps we got for this site, which is the one that confirmed the permission would never been implemented, sought basic full flexibility for any land use to come forward in a new allocation. So essentially the request was an allocation that was open in terms of land use, open in terms of floor space, open in terms of number of homes. So there was nothing for us to scope a new allocation on. And this is quite an important site because it abuts the sill. We would dearly like to encourage additional sill. As you know, we're on Greenbelt for sill. It seems an appropriate location, but rolling out new industrial policies onto lands that has never been considered for a potential industrial allocation post Regulation 19, we just couldn't. It was too much of an ask. So the position we're in at the moment is we've been trying to engage with the site promoter to try to work quantums or a basic framework for a plan through, but they at their end, they don't have their internal plans in order to share with us an external view. So for us, it's we'd like to see it redeveloped. Part of the site is not used at the moment. B&Q have moved off the site elsewhere. but there's nothing to form a new allocation on at the very late stage that this appeared. So I think there's a commitment from the borough to continue working with the developer. There's likely to, because it's a large and significant site, it's likely to need proper master planning for it because there's a lot of capacity in it. But for the purpose of drafting an allocation today, beyond saying that it's up for redevelopment with quantums to be agreed, land use to be agreed, and everything else, it's pushing quite strategic issues into the DM process.
So, as it stands now, other than simply removing the quantum of development, are there any other modifications that the council is suggesting would be necessary?
I think if bits of the policy remain, the policy and the criteria and the infrastructure requirements and the design principles were all drafted for a residential scheme in mind. So it talks about walking, permeability through the site, etc. Now, if the site goes for sill uses, those are clearly not appropriate design principles for them. So even if we were to leave it as it is, some of the design principles would need to be rechecked and modified because they just wouldn't be appropriate to an open scheme as the developer wishes.
Right. So let's take this back to what I'm concerned about, I suppose, which is soundness. So is the council now saying that an allocation for 1,600 dwellings and 7,200 square metres of Class E, it says Class E in the thing, I don't think it was Class E, but employment uses, is no longer justified, so therefore can't be sound? Just so what we do about it is one thing, but is it, because it could be that the council said, well, no, we think these numbers are justified. We just can't guarantee when they're going to come forward. So the policy might remain sound. We just have to say, well, we're not relying on those 1,600, and that would obviously have implications for the trajectory. And I must admit, from the note I got and a little bit of information, that's kind of where I thought we were going. Because all it said is we'll have to take the numbers out of the trajectory. Saying that actually we no longer think the premise of a residential-led mixed-use development is justified is a different order of things.
I think so. That is a different order, and that's not the approach that the council's taking. In terms of whether a suitable development could, in principle, come forward, that's to say in design terms, the issue is around the deliverability of the site, given the position that was adopted by, or has been taken by the site owner. Right.
It's not quite what makes sense. Sorry, I took it slightly different because obviously if it's suggesting that it could be employment-led, SIL, SIL, CIL, presumably, then as you say, many of these policies or the criteria become defunct or completely at odds with what's been proposed. So it does sort of make it much more, if it was I have been in situations where a council has allocated a site, said, look, we can't guarantee this is going to come forward, but it's an important site. If it comes forward, that's fantastic, but we can't rely on it. But these are the policies. This is what we expect developers to do. But there are issues, and you might say, well, it's not justified or not, but they have been in plans. This might have been that. You could say, well, actually, but again, I'm getting a bit of a mixed message onto what the outcome might be. And at the moment, it sounds like what you'd like to do is have a line around it on the plan, with a kind of non-committal, well, development, this is an important site, development could come forward and we'll deal with it as and when it comes forward, which is probably not effective, is it? So I'm conscious that we've not got a lot of time. I want to get through all the other sites, obviously, as quickly as possible. We could spend a lot of time on this. I'm wondering if I might need to ask you to write me a paper on it. It might be the most sensible thing, and then, although there's only Mr. Byrne here, maybe again, depending on what that paper says, give people the opportunity who've commented on Coliseum Retail Park the opportunity to comment on, because otherwise we could end up having a long discussion and not really get anywhere.
Exactly so. And as I said at the start, it is a matter that needs to be considered, and on that basis, it would be sensible certainly to provide you with a paper as to the approach we're adopting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's sensible, because say a paper setting out what the situation is, because it's quite a late change, isn't it? What the change is, what you think the outcome is, what you think obviously suggest a course of action for me to consider, and then I can get written representations if I feel it's necessary. While Mr. Byrne's here, so in case there's any points to make sure are covered, or at least any point of observations, you may as well say them now, Mr. Byrne, just in case, as you're here and been waiting patiently to say things.
Yeah, very patiently.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Really only two observations. But one is that it sounds like it might be coming forward for strategic industrial land, which is what we've been hearing for a while, I think. And if so, I guess for us, we're thinking, well, does that mean that it frees up land at Meridian Water tomorrow to deliver more housing? Which is, I don't know whether that comes into this or not, because this is sort of slightly melted my head a bit. Technical phrase. And there's that, and then there's just the concern about when this had, I think, even tested up to 1,800 homes, and if I'm understanding it correctly, the developer is now saying it's not viable to deliver. I think, is that what they're saying? It's not viable, but that again just leads to sort of questions across a lot of the other sites, because this is a fairly blank canvas in comparison to a lot of them. Not a lot to replace. There's not a supermarket there. There's not a shopping centre there. And so it starts to sort of ring alarm bells, I think, for what we were talking about earlier, in terms of, don't want to go over at Palace Gardens, saying, well, how is that really viable if this isn't viable? Because this is a much easier site.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points there about the note, because I think it's a valid point to say, well, why, if a developer is saying this isn't viable or deliverable, the council's content to say that results in the plan being unsound, whereas in other parts of the plan where similar points have been made, where a developer or even objectors have said it's not deliverable, and you'll have your views on whether you agree with those points, but particularly if a developer has come forward and said, well, it's not deliverable, you've kind of saying, well, no, we're holding the line there. So you could say, well, why aren't you holding the line here? And you might answer that now, or you might answer it in the note. But I think that's the point I'd want to understand is, well, why is this being treated differently to anywhere else? And I think, obviously, when looking at the consequences, it's not just the consequences for this allocation, it is consequences for the plan, where there are any knock-ons, not least for their housing requirement, trajectory, other allocations. It could be difficult to gain some of those points until the council's had an opportunity to understand it. But there's that thing scratching the back of my mind, is, well, why are you taking, are you taking this developer's position more, I won't say seriously, but more definitively than some other developers? Why are you going along? Why aren't you saying to this developer, no, actually, no, you will deliver the housing here and you will deliver what we say, because that's what the plan says. What's different here? And then we'll leave it there but that's for the note. But if you can give me a brief answer on that.
Well, do you want?
There's obviously a distinction to be drawn between an argument about the viability of a larger scheme, as opposed to the particular scheme that the developer is proposing. And of course, what we heard earlier on was an argument around the viability of the smaller scheme promoting a bigger scheme that was said to be viable, as opposed to this development site where the developer's own scheme is is being said to be unviable, because the allocation reflects at least in terms of what's said in the document. I'll be told if I'm wrong about this, but the scheme in the plan reflects that permission. But Mr. Pestle may want to add something.
No, I see, you're right. One of the differences with this is the allocation came off the back of the planning permission, which was already a controversial planning permission with a very high density in it. And in the Regulation 19 reps, 90% of the content is explaining how that particular scheme, the density and the format of that very particular scheme has been harmed by second staircases and changes to viability. So it doesn't take its capacity from the borough's evidence. So when the scheme has fallen on viability grounds, we don't have an alternative to put in, and nor does the developer. It was never taken that way.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to dwell on the favour. This was all submitted in Reg 19. Why it's taken to the day before or even the morning of the discussion on this site to tell me that actually we no longer want to rely on it. I know that you have raised before concerns about delivery and issues about it, but it's been quite to this level of issue. So if that had been provided before, then we could have had the discussion now, but it would have negated the need for a note. But I don't think we're going to get any further without a note, because I'm not entirely sure I'm getting the view that the council are entirely 100% clear on what it is, the outcome of this is anyway. So maybe you need to reflect on that. But I think I want to know, what I'll probably do is reflect tonight or at some point soon on if there are specific questions I want answering. You may wish to go beyond that in your note, but there'll be some minima. I say, well, please make sure this is covered, if nothing else. And then, but as I say, it might be something I have to circulate for views.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, I think we'll leave that there then, and we'll move on to 2.2, Heritage House. See if we can do these in half an hour. I think we're in potentially familiar territory with a lot of this sort of stuff. Can someone remind me where it is?
It's page 5.
Oh, here we are. Got it. Yeah, thank you. So this is yes, I think this is an intensification scheme. Am I right in saying there's an extant permission on the site? Is that so? The principle's been established. Is the extant permission in line with the requirements in terms of intensification? Just out of interest.
Yes, I think there's just a couple of tidying ups on the exact numbers, but it should be.
Is it? It's not under construction or anything? It's no.
No, they're marketing it at the moment, I understand.
Okay. But as an extant permission, for that sort of number, I can at least assume that it's not unacceptable in principle or undeliverable in principle. Obviously, your implementation timeframes are a bit off there, but I'm not as fussed about employment land, clearly, provided it's in the plan period. The 5 to 10 years is not as critical, because obviously there's no trajectory involved. I'm taking the innovative multi-storey development, as you said earlier, about 2.8. That's factored into the floor space figure. So it's sort of not a potential of multi-storey. In order to deliver that level of floor space, it's quite likely it's going to be multi-storey. Okay, that's fine. So that's fine. The capacity's been that. In terms of Class E, it refers to 2,000 square metres. Well, the land use requirements don't. They just say Class EG3. But then the implementation bit talks about small and medium enterprise. I think criterion C refers to small and medium enterprise. How are you expecting to control that? Because it's use and not use.
My understanding is this was the product of the planning application. There's a couple of corners of the site which weren't appropriate to main B8. So in agreement with the GLA, they promoted a small amount of E-class floor space, but that's within the current planning permission. And although we're cautious about squandering proper industrial capacity for light industrial units that can be located elsewhere, they made a case that they were appropriate here and they were a way of optimising the capacity on the site. So that's why we have this little bit of E-class.
Okay, but forgive me, Class E is Class E, but SME is a user, so it doesn't have to be for small and medium enterprises, does it? Or is it just it's SME because it's the scale of the use? So it's not.
Yeah, they're smaller B1C type.
So it's not a policy requirement that you know. I was going to say ICI, I don't think it exists, but ICI could have gone into those units if they wanted a small office, and you wouldn't have been seeking to stop it. Okay, so I think the reference to SME could probably come out because it's just the use class you're talking about. In the infrastructure requirements, there's nothing there. I'd say in terms of infrastructure requirements, there's not a lot there, and I think you've suggested in your hearing statement that that's down to the modest scale of development. But in gross and net terms, even in net terms, 20-something thousand square metres, that's still larger than some of your, for example, greenbelt allocations. So is the lack of infrastructure requirements purely down to scale, or is it actually more just you don't expect it to require anything?
I think it's because the site's currently in logistics use, so a lot of the kind of supporting infrastructure needed for that type of activity is already in place.
Thank you. I suppose, so I have a story, intensification, what effect does that have on things like the road network, public transport? And I guess I was thinking, well, if the permission included any requirements for those sorts of things and it came out of the mix in terms of any 106, then whether that should be set out in the infrastructure requirements as I think is set out in some other infrastructure requirements. So it's a internal consistency thing in one hand, but also well, actually, if the 106 did require certain things, then you may as well flag it up if a revised scheme comes in, I would say.
No, that's fine. We can go back, double check the permission, see if there's any musts in there in terms of infrastructure, and for consistency, make sure they get carried over here.
Thank you. You have actually suggested, I think, a modification which relates to infrastructure requirements, actually. I may have jumped the gun. 2.8, sorry, am I 2.2? Yes, sorry, it does it. You have actually got a suggested modification about incorporating measures to promote active travel, enhance cycling. So it may well be that's already covered, so apologies. Okay. On A, I think, A is interesting because I don't think you've meant, well, it might sort of, this must contribute to the placemaking job set to Southbury, sort of appears in some of these and not others, or this might be the only one. I've no particular objection to it. I mean, it's kind of, at least it's if nothing, it's that kind of catch-all relates to the rest of PL2, but I guess why here and not everywhere else, or, so I think my action would be consistency. I don't have many strong views on whether it should be included in all or delete from this. For conciseness, delete from this, I suppose, it would be I think it's just, again, a subtle thing here on B, must safeguard the settings of nearby heritage assets. Fine. No problem with that, obviously, in principle, assuming it's deliverable, and assuming that's how the, because must safeguard assumes to me that you're expecting development to go ahead without any harm being caused to those heritage assets, which may not be, which is fine. If you consider that development can proceed there without any harm, and that's your requirement, that's fine. That's sort of not entirely inconsistent with national policy. But obviously, is that the potential, or is it more about actually minimising harm, or whatever form of words we may come to about respecting, or, you know, which actually might allow for a degree of harm, subject to it being, you know, covered by other policies and so on and so on. So my gut feeling is, from all our discussions, that B isn't being quite so strict about the amount of harm that might be caused. Would that be fair? So, yeah. So it may be a modification there, but they may have picked up in some of the ways we deal with it in other of these policies. Nothing on C. D, I guess if this 39 is incorrect, then it's 36. And it could include, so again, obviously not absolute requirement. We may, again, I think this general point about cross-referencing to DE6, because there's always that underlying concern for me that it shouldn't be assumed that there are no caveats associated with development of up to 30, you know, these tall buildings, but at least with reference to DE6, even if it goes sort of by the time you get, you know, goes without saying, it just makes sure that everyone reads that and say, well, actually there are, it's not, you know, it's subject to rather than. H is interesting given the discussion we've just had on the other site about parking and on logistics site, and they didn't really want to go down the route of saying that it should be limited parking because it's bespoke. So is H consistent with what?
I think we'll just double check what the permission said, but what I understand is that there's actually quite a lot of parking on that site already, which is slightly unusual for our industrial sites, but we will check, and maybe if we just add it to the end of the Coliseum note for consistency between the two.
Well, there's also a suggested modification which talks about development must reduce on-site car parking to align with the London Plan maximum standards for a site with PTAL 3 to 4. But of course, there are no parking standards for B till V8 in the London Plan, as far as I can know, so it would be difficult to achieve because it does require a bespoke approach, I think. So I think, again, while not saying that it's sort of seeking to reduce on-site parking in and of itself doesn't appear to be unsound as a principle, but it actually doesn't sound like what it is, what it actually relates to the reality. So I think H does need some action or removing. It's either remove it or clarify that it's about, and that would be the same as that other site we just talked about. We're talking about what approach you're taking to parking, which might be you know, keeping parking to the absolute minimum required to deliver a use of this type or something like that. But I think some wording changes needed there. And then again, we've talked about the roof space. That's fine on this one. You have mentioned it here, but not necessarily everywhere else. So that's me on 2.2. Mr. Byrne, have you any comments on 2.2? Okay, thank you. Any comments any more on 2.2 before I move on?
No, so just to note, I think it's right that there is a parking standard for cycling for B8, but not for car parking.
Not for cars, no. That makes, yeah, well, I'm going to zip my lip on some of the things I've read in that plan. I mean, I can kind of see the point that for certain uses, it is logical to take well, what does this mean for this site and deal with it? And I guess always with the proviso at the back of your mind that it's keeping it to the absolute minimum to support the development. But recognising there are some uses that do require perhaps more parking than others, just for the realities of things, and servicing as well. I suppose it's not just about workers parking, is it? It's for operational parking and stuff.
The issue with these sites is mostly the operational parking and the turning circles and all that kind of thing. That tends to dictate the layout, and then everything else has to try to fit around it.
Thank you. So we'll quickly move on to Morrison's, SA2.3. So 650 odd dwellings, some of which is in years 5 to 10, some of which 10 years plus. Again, the numbers probably need to go in the land use requirement, and I think it's anticipated that the supermarket or retail floor space will be re-provided. Is there do we know what the state, again, it's useful to start off with the status, is there a developer on board, scheme in place, so on and so forth?
So there's, the site's been promoted to us, but currently there's no live planning application.
Does that mean, again, in line with what you've been telling me about some of the other sites in this situation, you are looking to push forward the start date back? So when are you looking to start?
I think this may be one of the sites where we push delivery into 10 plus years.
Okay, all right, that's quite a lot of that. But I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's in fact, I wouldn't dispute it. You've got development in 5 to 10 and 10 plus, so split over. So that's, I don't know how it's going to be spread out, but you still can't, even if you push it into 10, because this is a sort of higher number. 10 plus is still confident that it will be within the plan period, all of it.
Yes, we are, sir.
Okay. Infrastructure requirements. I think this one should contribute towards improvements. So no, yes, Southbury Station. Actually, there is. My note says no others do what they do. Then there are some, but it's a bit mixed bag, isn't it? Some do and some don't. I don't know again if that's deliberate or not. I think some of these inconsistencies. It's just whether I mean, it might be perfectly legitimate and justified and logical, but I always need not entirely certain sometimes if that's the case, because there are some other inconsistencies. So.
Yeah, I take on board your point about consistency.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think I think I'm not expecting any changes yet. I think if the council could just look at the Southbury Station point and see whether it's something that they need to address, and if not, then fine. I'll take it that it's deliberate. I mean, it wouldn't stop you asking for contributions to improvements to Southbury Station if it wasn't mentioned, because the generic policies, but it's still this sort of why in one way, not in another, and the developer might well quibble with you. Anyway. Again, I think here under B, I'm going through quite quickly. I've got a modification to B. So on B, it's about delivering streetscapes. Then you've got this sort of additional change we talked about. It's the same. I think it's the same phrasing that was used on the leisure park about no access onto the A10. I suppose again, my only question on that again is does that have any detrimental effect as to whether there's already an access on the A10 or not, and whether it is it would have any massive impact on delivery? Looking at the inset map, it looks like there might be an access to the site. That's the site to the south off the A10, but the access into the actual site looks like it's off Southbury Road. So
Yes, sir. And there's also access via, I think that's Baird Road, which cuts down into the existing retail park.
okay, so no particular comment on that. No other comment on that, rather. C requires a generous new north to south green spine. I suggest generous may be considered an ambiguous term, but But I suppose there's no standard. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think the intention behind that was to provide that flexibility depending on the scale and nature of the development that came forward. But I take on board your point that generous is very open to interpretation for decision makers and applicants.
I suppose it would be, well, what's the point? So I don't know why it would have to say generous new north-south screens, because if it's just providing a new north-south green spine, then it's doing its job, isn't it? So I was just deleting that wording, although it's relatively minor in the great scheme of things. In this one, so I'm not going to talk about typologies, but in this one in F, this must create a tall building frontage at the junction of the A10 and the Southbury Road. So this is not, you can do it if you want, or we'll consider it okay in principle. This is no, you will deliver a tall building here. Is that fair?
I think to be consistent with D6 and Appendix D, which doesn't specify heights, it kind of indicates potentially acceptable heights. The wording could be revised to could, or something a bit more qualified than must.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying that must would be unsound. I just want to understand if it's, the effectiveness is it achieving what the council wants to achieve, or suggesting some or unintended consequences. So if the council is saying, well, actually, we're not absolutely, requiring a tall building there, then yeah, must is erroneous. If you're sort of ambivalent, agnostic toward it, but if it is a case, no, in order to deliver the placemaking we want there, then a tall building is to be delivered. Then of course might be fine. I just want to, because this wording changes between each site, I just want to understand if these things are sort of deliberate changes.
Yes, sir. So I think it's a similar conversation to SA2.4, which we discussed earlier. Similar set of conditions and a similar set of objectives, really. So I think, as Dr. Jones suggested, it would be worthwhile looking at those two, and just making sure there's consistency within those site allocations.
Yeah, I'm all for consistency, so that's fine. I think by all means, I think maybe suggest something put something in the schedule to suggest something to me there. So the 42 metres are going to come from the same place. So again, we'll pick up on that, I think, when we get to the D6. But I'm not going to labour that point. And I guess the same point then applies to about heritage. It's in the same kind of category. There's no particular heritage concerns there, so it's fine. I'm nothing on H, I, and J. I think J, again, slightly different. I don't know if it's slightly different to 2.4. Yeah. So this is the same word as 2.4, isn't it? About minimising it. I think that's again okay, because I think the implication there is it relates back to the London plan. So I don't think that's a problem. But I think I'm content with that modification. Again, I think when you do come to update the schedule, I think useful to see if that wording about on-street parking is to be kept in or not. I am, ambivalent about that myself. And I have no other comments on 2.3. Any comments to Mr. Byrne? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Just a couple of quick comments and observations. Obviously, we put in a representation about the site, about the capacity being expressed, actually it being capable of taking more capacity based on the information put forward on behalf of the developer. We would suggest that it definitely needs it. It's a supermarket site. They're not going to be motivated, for such a low numbers. I don't believe. Particularly if we're talking about limited parking on a supermarket site, that seems sort of sounds quite nice, but it doesn't sound very commercial, like it's going to get them commercially motivated. The other issue, just the final one, was what's going to happen to the petrol station. As you know, there's a 24-hour petrol station on the north of the site. There's residents who live opposite that site in a converted office block who complain about the noise and the smell of it already. So just didn't see anything in here that actually addresses whether the petrol station is planning to stay or to go, but just as also a reminder, if it is going as part of a development, that can be quite an expensive item to remove because of the value of the land, but also because of the contamination in the area.
I think on the part, I'll just end this on parking, that the discussion we had earlier about Tesco, I think it was Tesco that site, the phrasing that was put there was about car free, and it was like, well, that's not really realistic for the retail. I think here it's different again, because it says either limited or minimised, depending on which version you look at. But that then does refer to the London plan. So I think I'd be the logic being that the retail, that the London plan parking stands for retail would be factored in. So it might be minimised if you assume that the London plan is minimised, and that would follow that logic. It wouldn't be saying you can't have any parking. It would just say it's the minimum necessary, I guess. Again, what I was saying, the minimum necessary to deliver a viable superstore, I imagine, but not being excessive. So that's, I think, that point on there. Point taken, I think, is a way of wording something that can address that. But they're on capacity in the petrol filling station, and I suppose there's an underlying point about delivery on here. Any comments you want to make?
I'll say that obviously it's been promoted through the call for sites and understand by Morrison's. So there's obviously an awareness of the potential for this site to come forward. So suggestions around, will it be released by the supermarket operator at this sort of number? Well, it was being promoted in any event. And again, as to the capacities, if the suggestion is it should come for more, well, that's something that can also be addressed at the appropriate time. It may be that Mr. Kennedy wants to refer to why that number, as opposed to any other number, was provided. But subject to that, that's all I say.
Okay, I don't think I need to, Rick, so I've got a lot of information about how capacities were devised. Now, obviously, I've got the representations. I've also look at what Morrison's have said, and again, if there's an issue, I think just questions of when to pose these sorts of questions it's not relevant to every single place. It's relevant to some sites. When we get to the end of this process, and probably when we look in the trajectory, and we've talked about this anyway in some respects. If you say, if all of these are sort of pegged at relatively conservative assessments, and some might come forward for more, and so on, and through the applications, is the consequence of that. I mean, let's be honest, I think we can accept that some of the comments are we can deliver more on these brownfield sites would potentially suggest that you wouldn't need as many greenfield sites. And we've had that again. I don't want to suggest I've lost sight of that discussion, but we have talked about it. And I think the council's position was, well, even if that was the case, to say this 600 and it actually came forward at 800 or 900, that's not altering your position on the greenbelt or greenfield release. That would be my, I don't want to keep asking the same question, but I just want to make sure every now and again just flag it up so everyone's aware that I'm aware of this discussion and why some of these points are being made. And not least, I understand that you also want to maximise brownfield developments as well, and there's something to be said about that. But clearly, the other side of that equation is the plan being realistic and reasonable in its assertions. Okay, sorry. Is everyone? I mean, I don't think we're going to be that much longer. Is everyone happy to continue? I mean, I don't think it's going to be very long. I really don't. So I think we've done 2.4, haven't we? So we can do Tesco at Ponders End. Poor old Tesco. I don't know how many stores left now. So around 500 dwellings. And reprovision of the supermarket. I've said this before about whether or not, well, the land use requirements should be, I think, more specific about the dwellings, but again, it's whether or not some kind of floor space figure needs to be put in or not for retail, or if not floor space, then, you know, it's clear what the expectation is. So it might be, you know, re-provide a supermarket, a viable supermarket or something like that, I don't know. Maybe re-provision of a supermarket integrated with housing. This wording is clearer than in some others, so that's fine. Again, I think I'll just encourage the council to have a look through some of these and see if, you know, there's a way of making sure they all sing from the same hymn sheet. Again, just so I know, anything in place for this one? Developer on board, scheme, plan application?
So the site was promoted to us through a call for sites exercise. Currently, there is no life planning application on site.
Is this another that's being pushed back? Yeah. I mean, I'm accepting now, when you say it's been pushed back into 10+ years, I'm not necessarily getting to you to be specific about, you know, is it 2032 or 2036, but obviously there'll be some element of that in trajectory. I'd be wary if I say, like, all of these have been pushed back and all got a start date of like 2031 or something like that. You know, you are reflecting on realities, I think. So here, on infrastructure requirements, yes, it does talk about infrastructure improvements of facilities at Southbury Station. There's a mod suggested here about enhancing accessibility connectivity to users. That's, yeah, well, okay, it's not necessary. You know, I don't think, but, so we'll move on from that. I've got nothing else to say about that. Just on the criteria, see a generous land. We've got a generous landscaped area this time. Again, I'm not sure. You know, that's open to interpretation. I guess it should provide a landscaped area along the main north-south connection from Southbury Road to Queensway. If there's a particular thing when assessing, enacting your judgment, it might be what is it there to do? Is it landscaped area to improve the streetscape, or landscaped area to hide something offensive, or, you know, whatever. But generous is probably ripe for debate. Then we have on E. So E is, again, we've got a slight change. So we've got the talk about the supermarket and so on, and then we've got provision of small workshops and/or employment uses could be considered appropriate and will be encouraged along Queensway to complement existing adjacent use. So is that, again, that's a slightly different approach here, purely bespoke on the character of the area? And, yeah.
That's correct, yeah. There's a locally significant industrial site immediately to the south, and the intention of that was not to have a hard requirement for the provision of employment workshops, but to kind of open the door to that possibility as part of comprehensive redevelopment of the site.
Okay, so this isn't counting towards any requirement. It's just if it comes forward, then albeit so be it. Yeah, okay. And then in terms of, we've got the typology point. We've got the could locate a tall building of no more than 33 metres in height. So fine. I'm again assuming there's no. It does say it's within the setting of the Heron Hall Grade 2 listed building, collection of industrial buildings which collectively are of a heritage value. So I don't know if, when talking about heights here or development in general, some reference to heritage and settings might be worthy of flagging, again for consistency purposes. And again, my now standard comment, I think, about tall buildings being subject to something. And then under I, we've got the same point really, and it's the same point was made, I think, about, you know, how retail fits into this position about providing retail, but I think the wording about consistency with the London plan probably provides an element of comfort there, because it's not saying you can't have a public car park or a retail car park, but it's we're referring to the London plan standards for retail. So fine. One thing that's not mentioned here, and he might not have mentioned it actually on the last one either, so I might flag, is a living conditions point, whether there are any factors about, do people live in it, is there any residential nearby where that would be a factor? Or is it what industrial use?
There's residential uses to the north of the site, but there's a bus garage and industrial estate to the south and west.
All right, so it's not
And
necessarily
a high street to the east.
not necessarily a factor. That I just want to. Okay, thank you. Any points on that one, Mr. Byrne?
It's just one very quick point, and sort of the same point as last time, but whether the reprovision of the existing supermarket includes the reprovision of the petrol station that's there to open 24 hours or not, and I just thought it could be a point of disagreement down the line potentially.
Yes, sorry, I didn't get an answer on that, did I? I suppose, yeah, it's a question on all of these supermarket sites where there is a petrol filling station, whether the expectation is that will be form part of the reprovision or not, or whether, again, the council is again, I've said ambivalent a lot today, I don't know why, it's the word of the day, is sort of agnostic about whether or not a petrol filling station should be included or not.
Yeah, that isn't a requirement of policy.
Forward, and it wasn't being redeveloped, then I guess you'd look at it under first principles and see what the effect of that is, and if it was being redeveloped or re-provided elsewhere, again look at it under first principles. So, okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on then to Sainsbury's 2.6.
So can I just add one point, which is about the generous green links and other elements. So just to note that the vision and the PL2 is anticipating considerable green improvements and green links. So it may be thought that having that reference to generous at least provides that degree of emphasis that otherwise might be lacking.
Maybe the way of maybe generous is perhaps not the worst word. It's one of those words where, you know, I suppose you can have a debate about it. But the if the policy were to refer back to PL2 or the vision, so I think it would be. I guess again, it's my standard now about if you've got an element of planning judgment, and because you can't explain it in the reason justification because there isn't any, then it would be a case of saying, well, because again, generous would be fine. I think if you've got RJ, because you'd say generous, and then you'd explain what that meant, and it'd be about delivering enhancements. Whereas I think here you haven't got that, so it may well be deliver a generous, if you use that word, to achieve the objectives of PL2 in terms of something to that effect. Yeah, I mean, it might be overkill, but it leaves no scope for doubt, or less scope for doubt. So Sainsbury's 868 dwellings. This is already 10 years plus, so I guess I'm going to work on the basis that there is no developer on board. But is this been put forward by the landowner or site promoter
That's correct. So yeah, it was promoted to as part of a call for sites exercise, but there isn't currently a planning application on site.
Okay. We're sort of getting used to supermarkets, aren't we? And this sort of thing. So. So isn't there sort of standard modifications just about improvements of facilities? I don't need to say much more about that. I know here we've got some reference in the infrastructure requirements about historic landfills and so on. Again, I think this is another thing where sometimes it's referred to when EA have made reps and sometimes it's not. So I'll probably just, again, I'll probably just issue an action at some point just to make sure consistent. Albeit I don't think it's critical to delivery. B, on criterion B, again, we've got the same point that's been made. We've got the same sort of criterion and same modification about no access off the A10. So here, again, it looks to me very basically like there's an existing access off Crown Road, so presumably that could still be achieved now. So it's not critical, so it's not fatal to the scheme to have no access off the A10.
That's correct, sir. And there's also the potential for it to be accessed from Baird Road and Dearsley Road as well. So they're options.
Yes, yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. We talked about generous green spine again, so maybe there's just some tweaks there. So we've talked about typologies at length. We've talked about tall building here, but a smaller, lower tall building. Fine. Well, not fine. Well, fine, subject to discussions on DE6. But I'm not going to say get into all of that now again. We'll debate this at D6 session. But what I've said about referring to D6 and possibly Appendix D. So I suppose that's the other thing. But again, I suppose if you refer to D6, there's an automatic link to Appendix D anyway. So it's. On H, should carefully consider the relationship with the existing inactive frontage. What's the outcome of that then? So you can carefully consider this. You've got an inactive frontage, which presumably is detrimental to street scene and so on, and that's fine. So you're presumably wanting to create a degree of active frontage to offset that. Or?
So if we refer to the inset map, we can see that there is a white space in the southeast corner of the allocation, which is where the substation is. So it's quite a substantial substation with exposed equipment and a big perimeter wall around it. So I think what you can see in the inset map is there is a proposal for some public realm improvements to around the perimeter of that, and I guess having any development backing onto that and not having the frontages of houses and doors going onto that, I guess could even be potential to improve that perimeter wall as well, subject to agreement with that landowner. So that's, I guess, what that policy is trying to achieve.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. I think parking, we're in the same boat as we have been all along, so nothing more to say from me on parking, albeit there might be some tweaks at some point. So yeah, no other point from me, Mr. Byrne. Same points.
It's just one really, and it refers to access to green space, and its point C on the design principles should provide a new generous green spine through the site, which links to Enfield playing field. So that's the other side of the A10, and I was just wondering if that's what. I mean, it also links to the Coliseum Retail Park, which may not be coming forward. But the main point is that it seems to be suggesting a green link across the A10 to link to the playing fields over there for green space. But I'm not sure if that's what it means, because it's obviously quite a dangerous road to cross.
Yeah, I suppose it's just useful to know if that's accurate.
So I think this is a good example where the site allocation interacts with the placemaking, the diagram that illustrates the placemaking vision, and on that there is a green link shown across the A10. So currently there isn't a crossing adjacent to the site allocation, but there is obviously a huge green space that could facilitate a great amount of amenity for those people, and what that policy is trying to achieve is a long-term aspiration for some kind of crossing there, whether it be a bridge or a light pelican crossing, something like that. So that'd be something that would need to be developed through a long-term strategy in the IDP, probably.
Right. So I guess here, this is one of those cases where that being specific might be helpful. Yeah.
Yep.
Might even be the wording I've been a little about exploring, but exploring the opportunities for a bridge or something. If that's what's being proposed, or a link, or if not a bridge, a crossing of some variety. Safe crossing is probably the word. And again, it'd be that way. We'd link back to probably PL2. And again, I think it's the consequence of not having the ability to sort of explain that in detail. So needing the criterion to be as specific as possible. So, thank you, Mr. Byrne, for pointing that out. That was helpful. Okay, is there any other comments on that? No. Then I think, are we on the last one? Well, quite. It already feels like we've been here all week. So 2.7 is another employment site. Crown Road Lorry Park. It's proposed for intensification, relatively small, 4,500. Square metres of employment floor space. I just noticed this redevelopment should provide an additional 4,000. I think probably to be considered, I presume it's a net increase. Is that right? Or is that?
I think it's a lorry park. There's virtually no extant floor space on it, but yeah, for consistency, we should make sure it's the net.
I mean, these aren't like, the plan doesn't get kicked out, I think, on the back of this. There's a modification being proposed, I think, on capacity, or rather, sorry if I could just get to the... So in terms, it says redevelopment should provide an additional 4,500, etc., subject to feasibility testing at the time the application is made. I think a similar form of words was put forward for RUR 04, which I questioned. I suppose the question is what that subject to feasibility testing at the time is, because obviously any application is subject to feasibility. If you think about it, no one's going to put an application unless they've tested the feasibility. So is it that you're content that it could be less than 4,500 because usually it's the other way around, isn't it? So it's a minimum of 4,500. If it's more, then we'll look at it. Is this case actually it's 4,500, but it may be less?
Yeah, I understand it's just a more explicit reference to what we were talking about earlier, that everything is subject to a viability assessment at one point down the line. So it's just stressing that that will be required.
Debatable if it's needed, I would say. I don't think it's necessary. I would say that's not necessary for soundness, because that's, again, what I said to the gentleman earlier, that's just planning, it seems to me. So a note again, I think I'm right. No, sorry. So again, in terms of where we are with this, is there a developer on board, scheme in place, so on and so forth?
So the site was promoted to us via Core for Sites, but there's not currently any live planning application.
Okay, but are you reasonably content? Is the reasonable prospect of it coming forward in the plan period? Yeah.
Yes.
As I say, it's not as critical where it falls between 0 and 10, but it's in the 0, it's in the 5 to 10. I guess it wouldn't be that bad. There's no trajectory for that, so it's not a problem. I've already asked the question about why is it allocated if it's employment on employment, and I suppose this point here is that it's the same point as made earlier. It's about meeting a London plan, I guess, and giving comfort. Obviously there's a point here about Thames water and so on, but sort of same sort of point I've made before, when it's flagged up in some cases, not others. And I think here there are no highway improvements here Yeah, if you look at some of the other SA2.2s, there's sort of there's like a longish form words which encapsulates highway improvements and pedestrian improvements and so forth. Not quite the same. Again, it may be deliberate because it's not considered necessary here. It may be not. So I think my general point about if you could council could obviously have a consistency check about some of these things, it would be helpful. And then yeah, yeah. Is it on A where it said should provide stacked industrial use to make efficient use of available land? Is that as necessary here? If it's an open, basically a yard with no floor space, could you achieve the net increase without necessarily being multi-level or stacked?
I think on this one you could, because the capacity of the floor space has been set at 65%. That's gross. 65% you can get without a stacked unit, but in the interest of meeting our needs, trying to improve our industrial land supply, it still seems a sensible thing to try to encourage it.
But it probably should be could rather than should. I would suggest. There is in F, so I have nothing particular on the others until we get to F, should respond sensitively to the listed building to the south of the site and the effect the development of the site will have on its setting. Fine, obviously, again, it's, but again, I think just how heritage is referred to, because it's a different form words. Should respond sensitively, again, is that meaning no impact at all, minimise impact, no unacceptable impact? If you take that unacceptable would be determined through the less than substantial harm test. So yeah, as I mean, what is the approach? But the principle of obviously having reference to heritage is no issue there. 21 metres here, but again, I'm not going to get into why 21 and not something else. That's for another day, I think. But at least here you actually have said to minimise impact on the listed building and rear gardens. So that's, I think there's at least that nice sort of, is a sort of logical extension of why the numbers are there. We might still end up having, say, subject to D6. But okay. I should allow sufficient space for safe highways access to minimise impact on public highway. Well, yeah, no, obviously, no particular reason why that's a terrible thing to say, but it's the only time you've said it. So, again, is that something specific to here because there's a particular highway safety issue, or is it something that just somebody's thought about, oh, it'd be a good idea here, but not anywhere else?
There's no specific issues that was intended to address, so I completely take on board your consistency point.
Obviously, nothing unsound about saying that it should have a safe access, but it probably goes without saying because it's covered many times, no doubt, in your plan. So again, it's just the decision on whether to add criteria or remove criteria to ensure consistency might be up to the council, but I might not advise on that to you, but clearly, bearing in mind what we've discussed about the length of the plan. There might be a hint. The parking issue, again, I think just need to look at because it's, again, this is slightly different. Well, the point we've discussed earlier about on some of the employment sites about how parking is referred to. It might be you just want to look for internal consistency there. Should minimise impacts on 9 approach to Enfield important local views. That's fine again, but again consistency about local views. And then you have, oh no, it's wrong. No, it's fine. I was looking at 5.7. So J and K, or consistency issues. And then I'm bound to note that on the other employment sites in the SA2 areas, this is where you talked about green roof, solar panels on roofs and so on, but you've not mentioned it here. I know it sounds like I'm being incredibly pedantic about these things, but yeah. Okay, I have nothing more on that. Anything from you, Mr. Burns? Yeah.
Sorry, so just one point. It doesn't say on here who the current owners are, and it does on the other ones. I'm not being a pedant, because the site looks like it's changed hands, so I just wondered whether it actually was still available, because it doesn't look like a lorry park anymore. It looks more like it's been subsumed into the surrounding industrial uses. And I just wondered whether, and I tried to look who was the current owner, and it's not on here.
Yeah, I suppose the substantive point there is whether it's still being, whether you're aware that it's available or not.
Yeah, so we've got a statement of common ground with the council as landowner, and they've indicated it's can be implemented within 0 to 5 years, notwithstanding the start of the plan period and the complexities that we've talked about at length. So.
Yeah. All right, but so the council is landowner, so yeah, okay, that's enough for me. I think to see that out. I mean, yeah, the whole thing about some of these tables in Appendix C, there's a bit of a wild and wacky. I've not got into it too much about that because it's they're not policy, but some say what the current landowner is, some say multiple landowners, some don't. There's all kinds of different ways you've done it. But I'm only bothered about policy to an extent. So any more points about the? Have I missed? Oh, make sure I've not missed anything.
No other sites, no, that's it. Just on the highway point, the Safe Highways Access, allowing sufficient space to minimise impact on the public highway. I was just checking, and in relation to the pedestrian access, there's a limited amount of space for pedestrian access, so would certainly assist with that aspect.
Okay. Yeah, I would say it might well be. It's perfectly legitimate to refer to it here and not, and so I think it's one of those things where if there is something specific here, then it might be. You don't need to add it to everything else or delete it. It's just because that is a consistent approach. You've mentioned it here because there's something specific here. Doesn't flag up anyway. But again, it might be useful for this thing to sort of highlight what is special about this location as opposed to other areas or specific about this location. So it is, if it is due to limited pedestrian access, do this. Then at least it's pretty clear as to why this is being flagged up when it's not flagged up elsewhere. And again, it comes back to this lack of RJ business, I think, where you can't explain things. So. All right, so thank you. That's, I think, enough for today. Apologies yet again. Clearly, my programming skills are lacking in this plan. So I appreciate it again.
It's really helpful to us to get through all of the sites. There are an awful lot of sites.
There are, and I probably could have thought, well, is it realistic to get through all these in an afternoon? But then it's balancing that against trying to minimise the number of weeks we have, because obviously I'm conscious of time and also cost and everything else. So I'm doing my best to keep it down, but it does mean occasionally we do end up going slightly over time. So I do apologise again, Mr. Byrne. I hope you don't get into too much. You didn't miss your.
No, we made it just in time.
That's all right. Yeah, and we'll be back tomorrow. Are you here tomorrow? I think you're here tomorrow.
Yes,
so my commiserations. Obviously, we're doing Meridian Water in the morning. I'll talk to Annette about who's coming but Meridian Water is a hefty one. So I will do my best to whip us through that as quickly as possible. But I'm whether we get there by lunch might be optimistic. So I'll have to see what the afternoon sessions are like, and I think I'll put the afternoon sessions in because they seemed less onerous. But you know, famous last words. So anyway, thank you again for your help today, and I'll see you all tomorrow at 9:30. So thank you all. Have a good evening.